Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. At The Reason We Learn, we aspire to be part of the solution. The purpose of this show is to take a good, honest, potentially painful look at the way kids are being educated. We know we can do better, and this is where we'll talk about how. Let's learn something. Hi, Christine. Welcome back. Thank you so much for coming back to do part 2 of this series. I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks very much, Deb.
So, as I recall, where we left off, we were beginning to discuss the lineage of this sort of liberatory affective education philosophy or theology. For those who are joining us and who have not watched part 1, I strongly recommend that you go back and do so. But we're going to dive right in here with the slide you see in front of you of Christine's presentation. Take it away.
Thank you. Yes, that's right. We had just got to the entrance of John Dewey. He'd just entered the chat. And what you can see on the screen now is also the introduction of Wilhelm Wundt, who laid the philosophical basis for the principles of behavioral conditioning. That's Pavlov's dogs, and that's Watson and Skinner, lobotomies, electrotherapy. And that lineage came down from Wundt through Wundt's pupil G. Stanley Hall, who was then the mentor of John Dewey. And what we're looking at is the conditioning and the creation of the kind of inner man that is befitting of what you can see at the top left-hand corner of the screen right now, as opposed to the conditioning and the creation of the inner man that is exactly what is necessary to bring about what you can see on the top right. So the habits of heart and mind, the kind of education, the upbringing, the school experience, the social milieu that's necessary for top left, and how that contrasts with what we've all experienced over the past 100, 150 or so years, that's brought us very much to top right. Does that make sense?
Yes. Would it be okay to read some of the slide aloud? I think it makes it much clearer. That way, anybody who's listening will not miss it.
Yes.
The part,
okay.
If you could just contrast the two.
Yes. Okay, so Wundt asserted that man is devoid of spirit and self-determinism. He set out to prove that man is just the summation of his experiences, of the stimuli which intrude upon his consciousness and unconsciousness. In directing the work of his students, he focused their energies on minute examinations of sensory perceptions in an attempt to dissect and quantify every aspect of action and reaction. Action and reaction. We're seeing a lot of that at the moment in our social milieu, on social media and the political scene, action and reaction. So Wundt's thesis, as I say, laid the basis for the behavioral conditioners that followed him and that came from Germany over to America. And these particular intellectuals or psychopoliticians or change agents, you might say, they were being sent over to establish schools orientated more towards the socialization of the child than the development of the intellect. And this was specifically for the emergence of a society more blatantly devoted to the gratification of sensory desire at the expense of responsibility and achievement. And that responsibility and achievement, merit, is very much what's necessary to uphold top right. Okay. Then we've got, by contrast, cult of Dionysus, tune in, drop out, no classical education, that's vilified, just social engineering thrust on children through a system of psychological programming. And today, that is what we call education. That's been our experience of education for quite a long time. So this was made easy by the impact of the First World War, and I would say the Second World War as well, in terms of taking out the patriarchy, what happened to the father figures in individual families, and what happened to the father figures in society at large, how they were vilified, how they were nullified, taken out. So this gave much more of a kind of full spectrum control to the expanding social state in terms of molding the minds of children. And the impact of that then on criminalizing males and socializing mothers hugely fed into the destruction of the family unit, which, as we know, was one of the primary goals of communism. So we're looking here at the role of subversion. So we'll carry on from there.
Okay. And I know we're trying to move through these quickly, but I do have a question.
Yeah.
And that is the picture in the upper left, liberty, prosperity, and the foundation of the American Constitution. Because it's been so long since those have been taught in our schools, I strongly suspect I have audience members who may sort of take for granted that they are liberty minded or take for granted that they support the Constitution. But when it comes down to the philosophy and the foundational values and worldview that you have to truly do that, I'm less certain, because I see so many parents saying, "Well, what's wrong with this?" So yes, we are the sum total of our experiences. And what do you mean self-determinism? So could you very briefly explain what would the opposite of this be, or what was it at one time? And you know, it's obviously missing. So what was it?
In a nutshell, try to do a nutshell. If man is devoid of spirit, he is devoid of his immaterial capacity to reason. He is what C.S. Lewis might call a trousered ape, for anyone that's read The Abolition of Man. He is just a product of the influences coming in upon him to which he reacts. He can only react. There isn't the thought there, the rational awareness and contemplation to be able to discern what's coming into him and think about that in relation to a strong foundational basis, moral basis, philosophical basis, in order to judge the experiences that are coming into him and whether they are healthy, appropriate for his flourishing, to flourish alongside with everybody else, this kind of thing. So he's not able to make conscious choices to move forwards. He is reacting, and therefore the choices are being made for him, not by his rational intellect, but maybe unconsciously or subconsciously by his desires. And that's not something that you would choose. Your desires often lead you, by the nose first. The emotions are much quicker, lightning faster than reason. So you're just being prodded and pushed and poked around every which way. But there can be a lot of pleasure in that. This is the thing. It's not mistaking what is pleasurable for what is essentially, in the long run, going to be the best for you.
Understood. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay. Okay, moving on. So yes, so we read this at the end last time, that Wundt through Hall and into Dewey has brought us to the situation now where Dewey, etc., that the whole purpose of education now is not to develop these cognitive skills. It's to coordinate the psychological and social factors so that the child is capable of expressing himself and may take great pleasure in doing so and great gratification in doing so, but only in such a way as to realize social ends. So the child won't necessarily understand why they're expressing themselves in the way that they are. They would be much more prone to going along with things, or to doing things to get a cookie, to get a reward, or not doing things on the basis of fear. Does that make sense?
It sounds a lot like training dogs.
It does. Ding, ding. It does. Yeah. Okay, next one. So here we can see, and this is from a book called The Lipic Connection, which goes right back into Wundt's establishment of his lab in Leipzig, and then his pupils, and then where the pupils went. This is looking at taking cognitive education, so our traditional classical education, taking it through to becoming affective education. So social conditioning, exploiting the emotions and redefining the meaning and the purpose of education. And this little statement here is really quite chilling. The situation response formula is adequate to cover learning of any sort. That's what they really thought. Well, of course, they knew they could ring fence people's ability to be aware of what was going on by doing that. They'd literally limited perception by doing that. But,
Wow.
you know, every single sort of learning that you could possibly do, situation response formula is adequate. So it just made me think there of Cell because they're so focused on emotional response, etc. And look at what's down there at the bottom. What we're really going for the children is a sense of belongingness and satisfying consequences. They
Doesn't
like
that
it.
sound familiar?
It does. Belonging. Yes, it does. Okay, I'm going on. Okay, so the American students of Wundt, the behaviorists, they set out to colonize and conquer via the written word, via publishing. They established a new field of academic study called education. It hadn't existed before. We forget that, don't we?
We sure do. I try to remind people of that. They don't believe me most of the time.
Yeah, yeah. So the American Journal of Psychology was established to this purpose, and adherents of the new field became a vessel for their work. And so there was a sense of solidarity and independence that was established around this new field of education. You know, and I thought about the Grievance Studies Project and all of the insert name followed by studies projects. And when something calling itself or cloaking itself under the name science is not a hard science, it's a new conjuring, okay, pretending to be science, of course they'd need to give it a sense, or give the players a sense of solidarity, because there's going to be a fair bit of flack coming at them from the hard sciences.
Right.
And of course they'd need to give them independence, because they want to rewrite the rules and they want to play the game with their rules. They don't want to play by the rules that have gone before, the rules of academic rigor, and all that kind of thing. So they want to make themselves separate so they can do their own thing in their own way. And I think that you know, we saw this happen with the gender studies and all that kind of thing in the 20th century, didn't we?
Right.
So this led also to a new field, child development, and the child study movement. There it is. There's that word again. Study, study, study. And of course, when they do these studies, it's not for the benefit of the entity that's being studied. It's in order to be able to mold, manipulate, and utilize that entity for the ends and purposes of the state.
Right.
Okay,
I
so
wanted
yeah.
to just throw in something again for the audience. It's tempting. We brought this up in our first episode or part one. It's tempting to point to isolated or anecdotal instances where something has been correct or something rings true. And what I would say there is, so does astrology. In other words, there are
Yeah.
lots of things that have just, whether it's coincidence or maybe just thousands of years of observation, have found patterns. So you can say, but this rings true or that seems true. And when you give it legitimacy, as they did in the late 1880s and 1890s with the creation of the American Psychological Association and the American Journal of Psychology and these type of things, that makes it even harder for people to refute. So my question to you, Christine, would be, where were the people in science and research and so on refuting this or speaking out and saying, hold the phone, what in the world are you doing?
I don't doubt that they were there. And um, when you see that the vehicles for publishing, the journals, the weeklies, all the ways of disseminating the information were captured. You know, money
Like today.
talked.
Like
Yeah.
today.
So you either are doing the kind of work that has a voice, or you're not. And so we don't hear about the objection to this new field emerging, do we?
No.
but I don't doubt at all that it was there. And there will be instances of people speaking up about it. There always have. I mean, you know, in the times we live in now, I don't know why it took me until I was in my 40s to actually hear of Thomas Sowell and read his works. He's been, speaking out for decades, and yet, many people don't even know about him. And it's
True.
not for want of him being on media, etc. It's just some messages are de-amplified and some messages are amplified. It's all public relations. I think that's a better way of putting it.
Yeah.
So child development, and it's really, if you just look at the masterwork written by Dewey's mentor, Adolescence, it's psychology in relationship to, among other things, sex, crime, religion, and education. Well, what have they been going after the students? What fields have they been trying to tackle with the students? What have they been trying to socially engineer them towards? And if we remember that religion means social justice these days as well.
True.
So they've absolutely, they knew at the time that they had to get right inside the head of how to mold and manipulate the young mind in aspects of sex, crime, religion, and education. And this really was the welding of experimental psychology to child education. I love that word welding. Maybe it's because I've seen my husband do welding, and it's not pretty, and it looks quite cobbled. I hope I haven't offended him. But it's something that it's either broken and it's being put back together, or it's something that doesn't ordinarily go with something else, and it's being welded on. It's kind of, it shouldn't necessarily be that. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on.
Okay.
So we've got an instance here of if I'm on the right one, could you just go back one for me?
Of course. I hope I can anyway. Let's see.
Okay.
Are we back
Yeah.
there?
So I'm looking at Cattell, and I'm looking at the fact that here is someone very influenced by Galton's eugenics, etc. That's not a nice influence to come through, is it? But here's someone who does the first battery of psychological tests given to a large group. And who were the guinea pigs? The freshman and senior classes at Columbia. And this then gave Cattell the kudos, really, to be established as the first ever professor of experimental psychology, the new field, psychology. Wundt himself actually had the title of philosopher, not psychologist. So this here is the birth of this thing called psychology professor. It's not really been around that long. So then we see the setting up of Psych Lab at University of Pennsylvania. It's the first of its kind in the country, modeled after the Leipzig one that Wundt had. So then we have him becoming head of Columbia's new psychology department. Isn't it just amazing that all of this infrastructure for psychology springs up? Okay, and this was the linchpin for the union of psychology and education. Right. People like Cattell were not just simply an academic. In fact, it really described him more as a psychopolitician, an organizer and a publicist, what you'd call today an activist for the new science of psychology, creating the publications and the pedagogy and the praxis which would carry the new subject to educators and scientists across the country. And this is how the snake oil gets in.
Right.
He purchased, and I wanted to ask, with whose money?
Yes, exactly.
With whose money? Which foundation was that coming from? He purchased what would ultimately become the official journal for the American Advancement of Science. And he also began the weekly publication, School and Society, and brought into being the reference works, Leaders in Education, American Men of Science, and the Directory of American Scholars. So this is making experimental psychology mainstream and kind of legitimizing it in the minds of the public with this new high priest caste of the new field. And it's, to my mind, this is normalizing the parasite. For anyone that's watched any of the Gnostic lectures, the Gnostic parasite lectures from New Discourses and Sovereign Nations, this is normalizing the parasite, I would say.
There are so many parallels to today. It's that kind of scientism
That's
where,
right.
and at that time in history, I do recall from my study of American history, we were, on the verge of that. The progressive era had begun. The idea that mankind could be perfected from the outside in.
That's right, which is
Efficiency
a
experts,
heresy.
yes,
It's a heresy. Yeah.
efficiency experts became all the rage. Woodrow Wilson was obsessed with this concept.
Yeah.
So this was part of the zeitgeist as much as follow the science is today.
That's right. That's right. This idea of perfectibility comes from the paradigm of evolutionary thinking, social Darwinism, evolutionary thinking, and that's another thing that has bled out into so many fields and areas and um, everything really. That's really skewed how we perceive what is possible in reality and desirable, and what is not, and what takes us to a pseudo reality. It's kind of a little carrot dangling,
Exactly.
and part of the seduction. We're very susceptible to that evolutionary thinking. We always want to be better. We don't want to face that actually things might be as they are. Okay, so next one.
Okay.
So Cattell, this psycho politician, I'm going to keep calling him. Maybe I should just say psycho.
Yeah, that works for
became,
me.
yeah, he became president. You mentioned the AMA, right? He becomes
Yeah.
president of the AMA in 1900, the first psychologist, woohoo, elected to the National Academy of Sciences, even though his own scholarly output was minimal. So his operational role was strategic. It was embedding and building out infrastructure for future intellectual, educational colonization and transformation. He was a change agent working at the level of education philosophy, theory, and praxis by positioning. And there's that little word. You can see it towards the bottom of the screen on the right. Positioning significant, influential work of key figures in the field who would then go on to found and build out and operate and direct things like the European Federal Bureau of Education and the largest institute in the world for the training of teachers, i.e. that incredible hub of evil, Columbia Teachers College, Chicago.
It is absolutely evil.
Yeah.
It's
By 1897, everything was in place for the propagation of Wundt's Leipzig lab psychology in classrooms throughout American education.
so they were
That just bears thinking
experimenting
about.
on children, literally.
Yeah, yeah, at large, at large. So like the spreading of our democracy to other countries, what happened to American education did not stay within America, but spread throughout the West. And what I haven't put up here is a whole other rabbit hole to go down, and I have a lot of information. I've tweeted some of it. The National Education Fellowship, founded by Beatrice Benser, renowned theosophist, it played a huge role in that, in that building out throughout the West, forging alliances with the League of Nations. And obviously the League of Nations was the precursor to the UN. So this is the beginning of global education capture by the UN, which we're currently in the absolute clutches of.
Do you get the impression sometimes that there were people like Alice Bailey and others who had a serious complex about America and American exceptionalism, Americanism, whatever you want to call it, relative to European ways of doing things? A kind of snobbery, I would think, where they would go to places like Germany and import not just ideas but people and have them come
Mm-hmm.
here, incubate their ideas, which might have sounded appealing to the American mind, especially the American academic mind, in the sense that it's new, it's novel, it's
Yeah.
experimental, which of course is aligned with American exceptionalism. We tend to be innovative and on the cutting edge. And so almost leveraging our propensity for wanting to see new things or to improve and make everything better to actually take us backwards to the old world of serfdom.
Yeah, well, I think taking us backwards to the old world of serfdom was absolutely, and we're almost there. Digital,
Right.
yeah,
But that's what we left. In other words, the people who left Europe in every wave of immigration from Europe and even from places that are not Europe left to pursue, the so-called American dream, or at least some level of self-determination that they did not have in their native lands. And America was the place for that, the shining city on the hill, right? And everything I see when I study education and I study these trends going back these 120 some odd years, shows me that there were people, some of them actually Europeans, but many of them Americans, who seem to have just had a complex about not being European, or being so in love with European, a German this and Prussian that and whatever, that they didn't want that. They didn't want America to remain America, either because they believed in globalism and one world government and that we shouldn't have separate nation states at all, or because they believed in socialism as a means of distributing wealth, or because they just didn't like the concept. For whatever reason, people make poor choices, and we can't allow that because that's messy. And you have lots and lots of control freaks out there who just aren't comfortable with that degree of constructive chaos. So every time I look at this kind of material, I just wonder, I would love to see someone do a psychological, dissection of these people and figure out what made them tick.
Well, I'm not going to go into her private life, but the private lives of these people on the whole, tend to be quite messy.
Right.
But I think there are aspects of most things that you've said there to do with Alice Bailey, because of course she was so into this Eastern caste system idea in
Right.
terms of the different quality of souls, that, yeah, she didn't want the plebs rising. She didn't want people to be able to make the best and the most of their own individual capacities. Not when you listen to her, The Future of Education. She has very definite ideas about where some souls are going and where some souls are not going. I mean, it's talk about eugenics. It's horrible. But I think also there is a huge snobbery. There is a European and English snobbery in terms of America. There's a lot of snobbery about old family lineages and stuff like that. So, yeah, I think it's a mix, personally, with someone like Alice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as well that there was also the opportunity in America, because it was America, land of opportunity, but there seemed to be a heck of a lot of opportunity for the programmers, right?
Right.
We'll bring you here and we'll pay you very well to have a career in behavioral change and social conditioning. You can be one of the people that tells other people what to do and manipulates other people, and you can make a nice lifestyle of that. There's a lot of that going on too.
Right.
But okay, so what we're looking at is this predominance of research into animal behavior, which was then applied to the training of teachers who took that, and they took everything they'd learned and they took it to every corner of the United States. Did they know? Did they know what they were doing? Did they know what they were passing on? I'm not sure. Personally, I'm not sure. I don't know what they would have made of this. I'm sure it would have been badged and packaged up in the nicest sounding language at the time,
Mm-hmm.
And everyone was surfing this wave of social Darwinism and evolutionary thinking at the time, weren't they? And progress and the what the promises of science and then into the future technological advancement as well. So I think it's very easy for people to be lulled that this is progress for real. Okay.
Right.
So there's quite a difficult concept I want to introduce now. I didn't understand it for ages when I met it. So that in running classrooms and curricula and schools on the basis of this new educational psychology, which is stimulus response, the trousered ape, if you like, this keeps students within what is referred to as the quaternary stage of development.
Mm-hmm.
And that just means this. Have you met that term before? Quaternary
No.
stage? No, I hadn't. And I actually came across it first of all in the work of Samuel Silver, a scholar whose work I've learned so much from, and I think it's great. He again goes way up high with a huge bird's eye view on this, and it's not been easy to understand his work, but once I had understood it, he lays all of this out there, absolutely all of it. But it's a very sophisticated piece. So the quaternary stage means you are stuck at stimulus response. That's the level you're at, and you don't progress beyond that. And that, I think, was the real mission and goal of education, as far as the education theorists were concerned. They dressed it up in all sorts of other nice sounding motives, but no, that was actually it, because that was going to enable the population control of the sort that we've seen on steroids since 2020. All right,
Wow.
and if we just go to the next one. This is just a little picture here I found, and I couldn't resist putting it in because the making of Automata, for me, just perfectly summed up what taking this stimulus response education philosophy through to the teacher trainers and then the teachers and then the students, exactly what it's doing. I think James Lindsay in one of his lectures commented saying, you know, paper clips beget paper clips, meaning this whole communist doctrine passes itself on, you know, it reproduces itself. And you can see it here. There are only so many movements that these mechanical things can make, and they can only go in one direction. It's ratchet style, you know.
Right.
And that's why when you try to speak to people, you know, you try to inform and help teachers or parents, you can sometimes get such either a bemused response or a strong defensive response, because to actually go back, turn the cog back the other way to try and see what's happened to you, it's nigh on impossible.
Mm-hmm.
It's extremely difficult. So yeah. Okay, next one. So we have this conditioning of students into a society which operates more on the basis of gratification than on the basis of reason or responsibility. And it's, of course, reason and responsibility that you need to uphold the republic, the sense of gratification that's exploited. You think about the politics of desire, etc. You can see that by stimulating the sense of gratification, again, you're getting students into behavioral patterns of passivity. So in this educational model, children expect to receive what they desire. Pedagogy of desire. That was one of Paulo's, wasn't it? Pedagogy of desire?
I know he had pedagogy of the oppressed, so it's quite
Okay.
possible. Mm-hmm.
So we've got desire here, and of course Marcuse, the role of desire, Freire, queer theory. Desire being harnessed in education means we've got a manufacturing line of well-adjusted children. On the surface of it, they look happy, they're all having great fun, but what are they well adjusted to? Well, they're well adjusted to socialism.
Right.
And this is the attempted transformation of human nature itself. This is the two visions of man, the ontological visions, and this is taking the children in their well adjustment, it's taking them to that socialist man. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And if we go on to the next one. I think that Hannah Arendt describes it beautifully. So she says, totalitarianism is the attempted transformation of human nature itself. However, this attempted transformation only results turning around minds into sick minds.
Yep. Sound
Arendt's
minds.
fear, yeah, her fear is exemplified by the attack on our children and the traditional family via interrogating heteronormativity and gender, deconstructing via postmodernist ideology, the pursuit of truth via the God of science, and the godless narcissistic pursuit of the ideal self, which is played out in cultural hegemony of mental health or mental healthism, where the self is made into a god. And I'm hearing echoes of Marx there with that statement, which we'll come to as well. And I've termed that making the self into a god prosumerism. And I just did a Substack the other day. If you want to know more about prosumerism, please check out my Substack for that.
Okay, great.
But so what I just wanted to point to here, the godless narcissistic pursuit of the ideal self. I feel I've got to do a, whoa, hang on, before anyone says, why does it have to bring God into it? You know, I'm thinking about my atheist friends. This doesn't mean that if you are not a member of a faith community, that you're a narcissist and you're pursuing your ideal self. Not at all. A godless narcissistic pursuit of anything is something predicated on hedonism. You know, That's where the buck stops, at the top. That's your highest goal, hedonism, regardless of whether you actually claim to have a faith or have no faith. So I get kind of frustrated that I have to keep saying things like this if the word God or godless comes into everything, but there's such a kind of dog whistle term, right? It
Right.
sets all sorts of reactions off in people.
Well,
So
as
yeah.
someone who is godless myself, it doesn't for me because I, having done this kind of work, I understand it quite well, and I still think those of us who are rational in our
Yeah.
godlessness understand that there are higher values, and we're constantly saying we don't need to have a deity to have values and ethics and morals and know right from wrong and so on. And so if that's the shorthand that refers to those, to something like the pursuit of truth as an example,
Mm,
first principles, things like that, as opposed to
that's right.
hedonism,
Yes.
then so be it. We need a shorthand, like we use the first person singular male pronoun when we need a pronoun to refer to humankind. I don't have a problem with that, even though I'm female. There are certain things people
Mm,
need to get a little less fussy about, and I think the use of this term is one of them because it fits. It absolutely fits. If you remove that concept of something above yourself, and I don't mean your rational self-interest, I'm just talking about the hedonistic self, then you have nothing else but hedonism. You have nothing else but the pursuit of immediate gratification.
that's right. And that hedonism can cloak itself. It can cloak itself in very highfalutin sounding New Age spiritual language. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I am in tune with my higher self. My higher self says this, therefore it must be good. Well, no, no, we're full of blind spots. We need our human nature is, in my opinion, it is fixed, and from the study I've done, can we attempt to make the best of what we have, etc.? Of course we can. Can we fall short of what we intend? Mostly we do. But there has to be a sense of that which transcends ourselves,
Right.
that which transcends men, women, humans, because we are not the be all and end all.
Well, we're
Okay.
also the only animal capable of perceiving that
Yeah.
we know of. I mean, maybe someday we'll discover there are other, and the dolphins can, perceive some transcendent ideas. I don't know, but at the moment, we know it's us. And somebody asked me today why the school in their district would put up posters asking students to select their favorite body part and put a post-it note on that body part. Why would they break it down? Aren't they always talking about the whole child? And my answer, and I would love to hear your comments on this, my answer was, when you're trying to deconstruct everything, and more importantly disintegrate everything,
Mm.
because
Hmm.
disintegration is the enemy, then you have to create holes to deconstruct. So the body is a whole. We deconstruct it, have them pick a favorite body part, and then we can solidify the notion that they can put their body back together in any way they choose, through
Just a
surgery or what.
potato.
It's, yes, exactly. So we break apart holes to create new holes. Yes, they
Yes.
love the term whole child and whole this and whole that, not because they perceive each individual human as a whole already, but because it gives them something to deconstruct. It's a project to work
Well,
on.
that's right. And perhaps it's not necessarily unity, criticism unity, but it's unity, separation unity.
Right.
And that second unity is a reconfiguration, definitely taken towards where they want you to go,
Correct.
and having to voluntarily sacrifice the initial unity that you had.
Transformation. Remember,
Exactly.
we're coming up to
Exactly.
transhumanism. That's coming next.
Well, this is where that takes it, doesn't it? Because they didn't want you to objectify yourself as a man. You know, masculinity is toxic, apparently. They didn't want you to be objectified as a woman, but they would like you to objectify yourself as as a something they're not even going to say, but as a, I guess, a transhuman group of parts, interchangeable parts. So
Exactly.
there's the double standard again. You are not allowed to objectify in these situations, but we want you. In fact, we insist that you objectify in that situation.
As long as
Okay.
it's not in reality, as long as it's
Yeah,
in the pseudo reality, it's fine.
that's right. So presuma is, in a nutshell, what I've come to understand it to be is an unholy mashup with Bernays and Marx, and it makes communism gratifying. I've just been listening to a panel. Michael O'Fallon, James Lindsay, they had a panel discussion with a group of Asian presenters, and there was the idea brought up. Something was said to James about, well, this can't be communism because the corporations are involved, and it would just be bread lines and things like that, and starvation if it was communism. But no, and he, very articulately went into the stakeholder capitalism argument, etc. And here again, I find that the kids sleepwalk into this kind of communism so easily because it has iPods and all sorts of luxury goods and ways of curating themselves and their image and the way they share and present that for social currency. They get all of those dopamine hits with this kind of communism.
Right.
So yeah, that's prosumer. So we'll go to the next one. And there's a little bit, I won't read this out, but for anyone who is going to end up having access to these slides, please do read it. It's fascinating. It's looking at the role of New Age spirituality in both the workplace and in schools. And I know that we know people who've been doing work on how that's coming into the schools. But this idea of I create myself, so the late modern individual as entrepreneur and virtuoso of the self. And transformation is here again.
Right.
And the kinds of people to whom this really appeals are chiefly employed in administrative bureaucracy, management, communications, IT, education, health, and research. And aren't they the people in the sectors that are completely captured?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This really
Indeed.
kind of, these theories really appeal to them. Okay, moving on. So with the prosumer, you've got the actual ability now, not just for the industrialist to seize the means of production, but for an individual to seize the means of production of themselves, because they no longer have the social expectation or the aspiration to orient themselves to reality and to work in harmony with tradition. They now can break with all of that and have massive social approval for doing so in this notion of curating and producing themselves. And of course, identity is a huge big piece in this. So I can create my own ontology and I can consume the transformed product of that. This is so toxic. But the material with which I create, they don't realize this, has been prefabricated for me because my cognition has been knocked out, right? I can't actually think for myself. I can't comprehend and look around me and discern and see what's really going on. But I can, through my interaction with social media, with my teachers, through people in my environment who affirm that, yes, maybe I am a furry, or yes, I can change my gender, or yes, I can be whatever I want to be. I can be a fireman, I can be an astronaut. You know what I mean? This whole go with your imagination piece, which has been heavily pushed from kindergarten onwards, I can now do that. I can do it for real, apparently. So I can create myself, I can feel like I can create myself, but I actually only get to do that with cookie cutter identity categories. It's a pseudo creation. So this very word curation replaces cognition and recognition of reality. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So if we, yeah, I won't say any more about that slide, but if people at their own leisure can actually have a read of that little piece there about first philosophy and metaphysics and ontology and first principles, because that Mao quote there about eliminate the contradictions and move the distinctions, well, how is it what was the line in the sand, what was there that meant that
Mm-hmm.
you couldn't do that. And that
Exactly.
is first principles, you know, and this is what was purposefully taken out of education, nullified, so there's no longer any access to that. I didn't have this in my education, right? I'm really embarrassed to say I was, oh my goodness me, it was only a few years ago that I even heard of this. That's shameful, isn't it? And then it's taken me so long to actually say, okay, well, what does that mean? And when I started to try and learn what does it mean, I'm then stuck with colloquial or vernacular meanings of words that I just know through everyday life, but they're actually not the technical specific meanings required philosophically. So I have to get a dictionary and read that, and then I don't understand what I'm reading, so then I have to try and get something else to, you know what I mean? It's this is
Well, and
huge.
you were motivated to do it, and have maybe you don't have the time, but you take the time to do it. I have a different word for it. You said it's a shameful or whatever. I'm angry. I'm actually angry about it because
Yeah,
I think back to how many hours I was forced to sit in classrooms, bored out of my skull, learning things I don't remember, but that didn't, were just gobbledygook nonsense. And this is in the late 70s and early 80s when it wasn't quite as bad as now, but they'd already changed history to social studies.
yeah,
And everything was so surface oriented, it was so superficial, and we certainly didn't cover any of the classics. We were not given the opportunity to study Latin or even Latin root words. There were
yes,
still some students, as there are today, who had access to classical education, but your parents had to go seek it out and find it, and it was private and so on. And even the private school I went to, and I went to a decent private school, not initially, but in high school. Even there, it was just more rigorous of the same.
mm,
And we weren't covering Aristotle and Plato. We weren't reading the lives of Plutarch. We weren't reading these things. And I'm angry that none of the adults around me said, let's give her these things, the foundations of Western civilization, and then she can decide at some point as an adult, if she agrees or disagrees or wants to study some more newfangled stuff that hasn't passed the test of time.
that's right.
Instead, I was experimented on like so many other students, and I listened to my anger. Imagine how people today are going to feel when they wake up at some point, if they're still capable of waking up and conceptualizing in middle age,
Mm,
or late middle age, as it is in my case, and saying, I was deprived. And now I have to take time away from just trying to eke out a living to educate myself properly about the origin of man and thought and ideas and all the things. And I feel ripped off, honestly.
yeah, I do too. I think to myself, I mean, I'm both kind of ashamed that I didn't know this, but then, like you say, angry too. I think, wow, what if I'd known this in my 20s and my 30s? What could I have
Oh,
done? How could I'm angry. I'm so angry with myself that I misdiagnosed what was going on in education. For the longest time, I kept thinking it was lack of funds or
well, you were in good
just,
company. So did most people.
yeah, yeah. But in terms of what it's taken to try and understand this, it's taken a huge amount, a huge amount. And in considering trying to help other people, a one size fits all teaching of it to others is, in my opinion, it doesn't cut it because um, that Marxist inversion of praxis, you know, put theory into the world not to understand it but to change it. Well, in doing that, you've changed people. You've taken them along those cogs of automata, and
Yes.
some people are further or not so far along that, and you can't just simply hit them with something top down. You have
No.
to reach them where they're at. You have to find out what it is that they assume. I mean, somebody asked me because they knew that I grew up in an atheist household, and this was a friend who'd been religious from the get go. She said, well, what did you believe when you were growing up? And I said, can you just let me think about that for a moment? Because
Mm-hmm.
I had to reflect on that. And I got back to her. We were doing some stuff together, and I came back to her 10 minutes later. I said, okay, I think I know what I believed. I said, growing up, I believed in science, and I believed that science had the answers about the real world, but that science was always learning, And so those answers were, I guess, what you'd call provisional. They were subject to change.
Mm-hmm.
So there couldn't be any truth because things were always subject to change. And how did we know then what to refer to as our best current knowledge? Well, that would be the experts, the people that were held up there in esteem. They had the answers. And what did my family think about religion? Well, they absolutely loved historical church buildings and the arts of the church and all of that kind of thing. But they thought it was something of tradition, coming from a time when people didn't really fully understand the world properly. And isn't it great that we've had the enlightenment and science and technology now so that we can actually understand the world for real? But it's nice that people have this tradition with these very nice buildings and this lovely music and art and all the good work's done for the community. And it's a lovely social gathering. That's honestly what I thought as a kid growing up.
Right.
And it took me a long, long time to totally revise that. I'll say that. But when what you believe as a kid growing up, you don't question it, do you?
No, and I've
It just
had people come to me and say, "Would you please put together a series of very short videos?" And I'm trying to work on it that explain the problem and sort of gradually get people moving towards being able to consume content like this that we're making. But you can't drop them right into this kind of video, Deb. You need to give them pieces, and please give them summaries they can watch in 5 minutes of different concepts or different ideas. And I've been sitting or struggling because I realize the more I simplify it into simple talking points or a 5 minute explanation of, let's say, critical theory,
yeah.
I sound insane. It
Yes.
sounds no. So the shorter you make it, the more it sounds like a conspiracy theory or something that should be printed on the front of the National Enquirer.
Yeah.
And if you have to drop all the context you would need to cram it into 5 minutes, I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm saying I'm struggling. And that is one of my issues. Or I'll have people say, I can't really send your content because it's, people think you're nuts. It sounds so conspiratorial. Why would people do this? Why would they conspire? Why would they want to hurt people? Why would they want to take away self-determination? That doesn't make sense. It is so difficult for people to recognize that human beings for all of human history have done things that didn't make sense and have ended up murdering millions of people as a consequence. But we forget all that. Like, it couldn't possibly happen, but it did happen. Mao happened. Everything Mao said didn't make sense. But it was real. I'm not making it up, right? It's not some fever dream that I have. And yet they just brush you off. That's crazy.
Yeah. Well, I think there's something that happens in an individual that wants to make the effort to learn. And it's not about making the effort to learn because you damn well should. I mean, yeah, you damn well should, but that's not really going to do it. There has to be, it's desire again, right? The left
Yes.
knew that desire is the motivator, and it is. So you have to want to understand. And goodness knows, I don't know why I wanted to stick with this as much as I do. It's been a huge personal cost, I have to say, massive career cost. It's not yielded anything in terms of social and material. It's quite done the opposite for me.
Right.
And yet that hasn't at all changed my desire to want to know.
Right.
And I don't know why, but that is the case. And I think unless someone has actually experienced observing something or encountering something that's made them go, hang on, that's not what I thought it was. Hang on.
Right.
Unless they've had their own personal glitch in the matrix, it's very difficult to come at them with any of this. There has
Exactly.
to be something. There has to be a little piece of the tape that's up that you can grab. And that has to come from them.
Right. The Wizard
Um,
of Oz, they have to see the curtain that the
yeah,
wizard is hiding
yeah.
behind.
And you can't force it, which is why I've gone through periods of being very, very frustrated because I think that the efforts sometimes are cast over a very, very wide net, and it dilutes any potential movement forwards. And
Right.
I think if there was infrastructure for people who have gone through their own, what the holy hell, where, what, and they have this desire, they want to know. They might not have the language. They might not, there's all sorts of things they might not know, but they know in their gut something's wrong, and they're prepared to follow that wherever it leads. I mean, they may at some point hit a personal cost that they're not willing to sacrifice.
Right.
That's their choice. But there has to be, I think there needs to be some kind of infrastructure to bring people together at the level at which they're at. Something for people who are coming in at entry level with this, something for a little bit more intermediate, and also giving them the tools with which to research further themselves at their own pace. And then something for people who have been at this quite a long time, and bringing them together, creating the resonance necessary to then make effective changes. All right, we need our own vehicle for transformation. That's what I feel is lacking. Sorry, I was a bit soapboxy there, but I'll come
No,
back to it at the end.
I appreciate that.
Okay, so yes, psychology of religion. Look there, right on the right-hand side of the screen, the front piece, that little phoenix rising from the ashes there. Do we have? That's a very common symbol of transformation. And look where that's coming out of, Teachers College, Columbia. There was a big drive to a huge kind of expanse of academic work. I might say research, but I don't think it's conjuring again. Academic work on the psychology of religion. And if we look at what's said there, this is quite key. The psychology of religion was emerging from, in quotes, favorable conditions. What were those favorable conditions? The separation of the social sciences from the hard science, we spoke about that earlier, and the establishing of education theory in its own right, its own field. So this is really the social science. This is no longer subject to the same academic rigor and accountability as other fields and disciplines. So now this is totally possible to put theory into the world, not to understand it, but to change it. We're back to that inversion of praxis.
Right.
Okay. So this work on psychology of religion is really a work on social conditioning, and that's okay. We can go to John Dewey. Here he is. This is the man supreme. When I first came across his book, A Common Faith, it blew me away, because this has been a real linchpin for me in terms of the strategy and the tactics of how the old, if you want to speak in Maoist terms, the old has been transitioned through to the new. And I've had this book, I've only had an electronic copy, I've only had access to reading it online. I still have not closed this book. I have read it through, but it remains open all the time, because so much that we're experiencing, the origins of it, are going back into this book. And it just staggers me how much I've kept going back to it and kept finding. So the human abode of the religious function. What Dewey did was to strip traditional faith of its cognitive, rational elements, so ontological understanding, telos, axiology. He dissects the affects, the feelings, the religiosity, and he reorients them, harnessing all of that visceral emotional power towards what Gramsci called full terrestrialization of thought. So he is bringing the transcendent down, fully locating it within the material, the person, the human person. So he's actually removed the transcendent function of religion in the same way that he removed the cognitive function in education. And as I've been learning, the transcendent function in religion and the cognitive function in education are much more closely linked than people really think. That's a whole other discussion. So this is religion gutted out and repurposed as host to the manifestation of the parasite, social justice. Dewey's strategy was that of philosophical pragmatism. So the ends justify the means, instrumentalism.
Right.
For him, now we don't know whether he actually believed this himself, but he certainly used this theory. And I would think that as a very clever guy, he didn't believe it, but he wielded it. And that was how a lot of them operated, right?
Right.
So according to his theories, we'll say, knowledge arises only through adaptation to the environment. Knowledge and truth are discovered by the student, in his theories, not imparted by the teacher. Truth changes according to changing circumstances. And I want to say success, but I should say operational success, because it's success towards certain goals for certain people, right?
Right.
It's not success for everyone. Operational success lies not in knowing tried and tested lessons of life, but in the ability to adapt by discarding outworn ideas and embracing new standards. And this is the language that's in our educational policy documents all over the place, right now. And if you realize that by 1970, every certified teacher had been trained by the disciples of John Dewey, you understand why we're at where we're at.
Exactly.
Okay. So it's just incredible what he did. So what does it mean to be human in a world where man is meant to become his own God?
Yeah, I can't imagine the anxiety that would result from that.
Well, on a very, very small scale, you've already mentioned it, when the teacher abdicates their duty to the child in the classroom, and the child, well, it's whatever you want it is. What do you want it to be? What do you feel like it is right now?
Yes.
And the child is expected to become their own God. And the responsibility and the weight of that is too much to bear, right? For a
Yes.
child. So C.S. Lewis might have said that for someone to become their own God, that means that it's the removal of the mediating function between our rational faculties and our appetites, the confinement of man within the prison of inhabiting only that quaternary realm. And that's ironic, because for the Gnostics and the Theosophists, to become your own God is what they say is ultimately liberating. But that's to become your own God, I would argue, in pseudo-reality.
Right.
Okay. While you are still trapped actually within,
Yeah. I've always wondered about that. Like, how do you plan to remove yourself from actual reality? It almost sounds like those doomsday cults
well, it does,
where,
but you know that picture of the young person who's in rags, and they look like they're on like a dirty cell floor
yeah,
in rags, and they've got the virtual reality headset attached to them.
yeah,
They've become their own God in that way, but it's
yes,
not. It's in pseudo reality.
correct.
But of course, if you're someone who's one of the controllers, one of the elite, one of the manipulators of other people, then there is the sense that you've become your own God in the power that you can wield over others. So that's
Right.
another sense of it there. Okay, it means transforming the man of traditional faith. And if we just go, I'm not going to talk much about how Dewey destroyed the souls of children. People should go and read that article. But yes, so transforming the man of traditional faith into absolute man of humanism, and therewith transforming him into synthetic, contrived man of social justice. That's the root. That's what it means. That root for man to become his own God. And social justice is a catechism, to borrow a religious term, a catechism for remaking man into socialist man in common faith. And Common Faith was the name of the book that Dewey wrote. And so now social justice activists and allies are working for global transformation in the religion of sustainability. And in Dewey's words, here, if we just go to the next one, actually. Next one.
I love it, the very errors to which idealism has given rise.
Oh yeah, sorry, it's back. Sorry, it was actually back
Okay.
one. My
Okay.
mistake.
That's all right.
I want to read out this particular set of Dewey's words. Back one more.
Okay.
I hope. Yes, here we go. Here are Dewey's words. And when people say explicitly that there's sustainability, there's common faith, it is a religion, and they get poo-pooed and scoffed, just listen to what Dewey says here. Here are all the elements for a religious faith that shall not be confined to sect, class, or race. Such a faith has always been implicitly the common faith of mankind. It remains to make it explicit and militant. And this was his teacher training program. This was the job of bringing teacher training into the academies and the build out and the spreading. So Dewey's common faith of social justice, made explicit and militant, was the philosophy and pedagogy of teacher training programs throughout the West over the past century.
Wow.
That's my claim, okay? I'm sticking to it.
I would tend to agree.
Yeah, so you've got here, you can see again on that particular slide, federal education grants subsidize a liberal academic elite with its secular, humanist, socialist agenda, thus violating the constitutional prohibition against establishing a state religion, humanism, actually, social justice.
Yeah.
So establishing it via teacher training and bringing it into being based on the theology of Marx, and I would say the denominations of Dewey, Marcuse, Freire, and under the dialectical faith of leftism. And there's some very interesting work being done by people like Representative Mike Belcher from New Hampshire, and he has a Substack, I think it's called A Path Through, and there's really interesting work being done by him and others on having social justice, theology of Marxism, actually properly classified, because they've skirted around it in years gone by, haven't they? They tried to actually pin this down and have it declared as a religion, but it was evaded. But there are people working on it now. I'm hopeful, anyway.
I'm hopeful as well, because I think in the court of law, in a proper court of law, it would actually be fairly easy to prove.
Yeah, and if you trace it, yeah, and if you go back through to the founding of teacher training and you look at Dewey's role in this, it's absolutely explicit. So I don't think they can deny it any longer. Okay, let's go on. This little piece in the middle here, so the fact that Dewey removed and nullified cognitive aspects of education meant that we weren't encouraged, or we were actively discouraged from considering things like first principles, traditional theories, and things like that. And Andrew Sandlin makes the very good point that we should never discount ideas and thinking. We should never go just for actions and practice. You know, that, okay, kids, explore, and then come back and tell me what you feel about it, you know.
Exactly.
That might be fun, might be exciting, it might be pleasurable, but in terms of what we're actually learning, no, not so much. So we shouldn't discount the ideas. It's important that they come first at the beginning, because that attunes the hierarchy and the relationship of metaphysics and epistemology and praxis. It puts them in the right hierarchical order. And what Dewey's doctrine of social justice did was to completely invert that order. So for Dewey, you have praxis, then epistemology, which then tells you, and of course it's guiding you to that metaphysical consideration of yourself that then goes towards and is oriented to our common goals, sustainability, Agenda 2030. So that there's all these education theories, I guess I want to say, were operating the way that they were in order to totally rehash man's sense of himself in relation to everything else, to change man's perception of himself metaphysically, true transformation. And they did it.
Right.
So people like me, okay, I'll just speak from my own ignorance. People like me, unknowingly grown up and been educated in a system predicated upon metaphysics that we have not been aware of, and thereby not articulate in. We didn't even know what we didn't know, right?
Right.
Okay, so, yeah. So here, I've always liked the imagery of plants, and, you know, if we're thinking about natural order and first principles, traditional education, I think the imagery of nature is very effective. And, you know, we've had for the last X number of years bright students, motivated students, interested students, engaged students. But if you're planting them in this soil of social justice, it's going to affect how the seed develops and actually how they root and how they grow. And I think this really comes back to the issue of mental health as well. Are their roots enabled to really dig down and have good solid foundations? Are they able to grow? What's their water? What's their sunlight? How are they developing? And we know that they've been growing in very poor conditions and they've not had optimal development at all. So if we go to the next one.
Okay.
So the work really, where my whole research has been taking me is less on the plant that you can see above the ground and how that's growing, but increasingly much more on the cultivation of soil.
I love
And
this. I love this image so much.
okay,
This is really, really good, Christine. And I hope the audience will spend a moment here and linger and think about the meaning of this visual. What,
okay,
explain more about what you
okay. Well,
meant with it.
it's my image, and I am not techie at all. I'm really rubbish at this kind
No,
of
but it's
stuff.
still really good. Go ahead.
But I have so many visuals in my mind. If I could partner with someone who can produce this kind of thing really well, they're graphic, they've got the means to do this, is what they do. I could create so many visuals for people that just give the sense of things rather than me waffling on, you know. So what we have here is that the observable you that develops. You're starting right from your attention span, the way you give your attention to things, or you're enabled to give your attention to things. So that's something that can be developed and enhanced and increased. The way you receive things, your all of those kinds of things. That's what can be seen from your parents can see it, your peers can see it, your teachers can see it, and they can intervene and help develop. But what you don't have control of, and perhaps not even knowledge of, is the fact that all of those aspects of learning are built upon what you can't see. That the methodology that the teacher is using, the pedagogy that informs that. So where has that come from? Has it been Paulo Freire pedagogy? Has it been John Dewey? Well, for the teachers coming through the system the last X number of decades, yes, it has. What is the epistemology? What sort of knowledge is being drawn on? Is it an established traditional epistemology, or is it one of the new fashionable ways of knowing? Okay, what philosophy is undermining that? So as we go down a level, we find a foundation upon which the upper levels are built. So the epistemology, it doesn't happen in isolation. If you're drawing on ways of knowing, subjective ways of knowing, then that is rooted in a very specific kind of educational existentialism, progressivism, and we're going to see these in a couple of slides' time. And that is also, the philosophy there is also linked to theology. Now, again, people say, but I don't go to church, I'm not religious, etc. No, well, the theology of Marx has been what's driving education for the last century.
That's right.
So the Marxian theology informs the philosophy, which then informs the epistemology, which then dictates the pedagogy, which then provides the methodology, and on we go. And underneath that, underneath theology, of course, we go back to that notion, that the two visions of man, which I spoke about in the first episode.
Right. And this is what you were talking about when you said, perhaps parents listening should stop and think about, what did you believe when you were in school, when you were a student in school? What, to the extent that you can remember, what were the core beliefs about the world that you held while sitting in that classroom? What did you pick up on as far as the beliefs being taught to you? Because all of it flows from that. So everything above the dirt is a reflection of all these things that are pictured below the dirt for your kids right now.
That's
And
right.
it's not a question. I run into this when people say, well, I'll just supplement at home. I'll just make up for it at home. I'll fill the gaps. What they're missing is it's not a question of gaps. It's not a question of your kids getting an incomplete, picture and you're just going to add some things. They're being rewired. The
They are.
operating system of your child, which is what you see below the dirt here, the
Hmm.
operating system of their mind is a completely different one than you thought was being installed and being updated. So you think your kid's running on iOS or whatever, and they're actually
Yeah.
running on, whatever mainframe. But it really is a mainframe technology. It's old technology. It needs constant maintenance by some expert in charge who is the only person who knows how to do it. It only gets updated in batches. I'm
Mm.
sorry, I'm going to carry this all the way through, but I think it's a good metaphor because they think they're dealing with gaps and they're not.
Absolutely. That's right. And going forward, I really want to work with other people. This is not a one person thing, right?
Mm-mm,
Um,
mm-mm.
there needs to be a coming together of minds that understand this. Uh, a very fruitful one if they're from different domain backgrounds as well. That coming together, that understand this hierarchical relationship between these things, and that can and want to work towards setting the cornerstone of that hierarchy aright and
Yes,
strengthening immunity to the mental pathogens that are latched onto by this social justice operating system.
yes,
Because it's not just a case, I mean, how is it that people going back a couple of generations were so open to this? It's because of the mental pathogens that ingested. We all have an immune system, right? We understand that immune system in the way that it works with our physical health, but we don't understand it so much with our mental health, emotional health, mental health, cognitive function, uh, because we're not taught about it, because it was that was vilified and thrown out. And also, it still is presented quite often in quite archaic language that, and most people don't have the Velcro in their heads for that to stick to. So I really want to work with other people who are of like mind that want to renew this knowledge and this understanding and bring it to an awareness of people now, using a number of means to do that. That's what I want to do. So if there's anyone else out there, and I can't do it in my free time because I have no free time.
yeah.
I've had no, I've been struggling in the odd snatched half hour, couple of hours to try and get as far as I got. I took 3 days to get ready for this and shut myself away. I had to leave the house. And
Mm.
I was astonished by how much I could get done when I had a day away without any
Yeah.
interruptions.
I know the
Um,
feeling.
I
I
know,
know the
and I
feeling.
know lots of people are struggling with this, but for goodness sake, if people are really serious about making headway with this, can there not be some kind of institute or organization or something that brings people together that are committed to working on this, to give them a proper functioning working environment to do it, and to enable
Right.
them to support their families in doing it as well?
Exactly.
Because I'm sure I'm not the only one that would commit the rest of my working life to doing this.
As
You
would
know,
I. And I think the challenge is the foundations and the people who have the funds for this are actually pouring their money into the other. They're pouring their
of
money into
course they are.
Castle. They're pouring their money
Yeah.
into, and they have done. I mean, Ford Foundation, we know, has been active in poisoning, our, you know, education ecosystem since the start.
Mm,
Rockefeller Foundation as well. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Most even the Koch brothers,
that's right.
even Walmart, even Amazon. They're all doing it. All state. You name it. They are funding the others because that's what's fashionable. We are just as in the 1890s. What is the zeitgeist? What is fashionable? That's what they're going to fund.
Mm,
So we're not
yeah. And
fashionable.
no, I know, and also it's this circular setup with the tech companies as well, and they know where the data's going, etc.
Of course.
Yeah,
They can't even
yeah.
find us and we can't find them.
No. Okay, next one. So yes, in terms of understanding that hierarchical relationship, I think one of the best videos you can watch is, well, the whole series of The Strange Death of the University, Strange Death of Knowledge, Strange Death of Science, etc. But part one, The Red Thread, produced by New Discourses, it was amazing. Just the first 20 minutes where James Lindsay went through these words that even at that stage I don't think I got a proper handle on.
Mm-hmm.
Axiology, ontology, telos, epistemology. I kind of heard them, but when you have to consider them in a hierarchical relationship, it's like ping, suddenly it's like seeing one of those hidden pictures, and it suddenly comes into view what the numbers are. You go, right, okay, now I understand what they give to each other, and yeah, I get it now. God, why didn't someone say that to me when I was a teenager? I could have gone through life understanding it then. But so I would urge people, if you haven't watched that series, you must do it. And Donald DeMarco has been consistently a source that I've gone to that's explained this mental rot and what the proper ordering of the cognitive function really, really is and should be. So I've got just at the bottom of that little sentence in blue, metaphysics binds and orients. In modern education, this ontological and axiological function is being done. It's happening via woke orthodoxy. So that function,
Mm-hmm.
which is the function, it's a religious function, metaphysical function, and the woke orthodoxy has had its hand on the reins of that for a long time. And that's what needs to be wrested away.
That's right.
It's working at that level. Okay, let's go on. Well, when I was younger and I was on campus as a student, and the Christian Union members would come, if I'd encounter one that was trying to preach the gospel at me, I would just scoff. I was terribly rude, and I found all of that really in your face, kind of off-putting, and yeah, I couldn't get down with that at all. And then if you told me at the age of 50, I would be doing deep dives into the Catholic intellectual tradition and finding that it was one of the only things that actually made sense to me, I wouldn't have believed you, right?
Right.
So I've been doing a lot of listening to Father Ripperger. I know James shared one of his videos one time, and I listened to a lot of his stuff after that because from an intellectual perspective, he made so much sense to me. And he has a huge book called The Introduction to the Science of Mental Health, which has been very helpful. I'm not fully through it by any means, and it's quite complex and very dense, but
Right.
incredibly helpful. Okay, so and these really are his words at the top there. The synthesis of all heresies, the root of modernism, is immanentism. It's where you make yourself and your feelings, your own interior life, the judgment of whether something is true or not, rather than reality itself. And when I first heard him say that, I thought, goodness me, that's exactly what happened in education
Right.
with progressivism, with bringing self-expression, self-esteem. The self was the root of everything. So I see it as one of these key linchpin dynamics, like a spell or a curse that's happened in both domains and yielded the same spoiled fruits. Okay, so for viewers and listeners who haven't come across these different educational philosophies, I'll just read out progressivism. Progressivists believe that education should focus on the whole child rather than on content or the teacher. This educational philosophy stresses that students should test ideas by active experimentation. Learning is rooted in the questions of the learners that arise through experiencing the world. It's active, not passive. The learner is a problem solver and thinker who makes meaning through his or her individual experience in the physical and cultural context. Effective teachers provide experiences so that students can learn by doing. Do you remember when we were listening to the dog trainers a few
Yes.
months ago, right? It's all about providing the experiences, the stimuli rather, so that the students can learn based on their own reactions to things.
And I've had people say to me, "Isn't that the same as Montessori?"
Mm-hmm.
And I have to argue with them and say, no, it is not. If you read Maria Montessori, if you've ever been in a true Montessori classroom, there are stations, there are areas set up with certain materials, certain tools, and so on. But it is not. They are specifically designed for and oriented so that the student has a limited range of experiences they can have with these implements or these stations. And yes, they will be exploring and experimenting. Remember, we're also talking very young children initially in a Montessori classroom. And some other Montessori activities are also very goal oriented. It's very specifically designed for them to experience struggle or challenge at solving a specific problem. It's not just, hey, just go and feel things or go have experiences. We're going to dump a bunch of blocks in the middle of the room and just go play. There's a giant difference between go play with blocks and here's a water station with different measurement. There's a quart and a pint and different things. And then there's a level and you can put one on one side and a scale and see what happens when you fill the water here. Very, very different. They are specifically contrived to teach the child certain concepts. And so not all experiential learning, I wanted to get this out because people will say to me, are you demonizing experiential learning? No, of course not. But there's experiential learning and then there's just experiences.
Well, that makes huge sense to me. It resonates very strongly. The musicianship program I used to take and go and deliver whole school INSET with, so I have all the teachers and they'd be the children and we work through things. That absolutely had the sessions opening with doing, but it wasn't random doing.
It's not play.
No, it was quite tightly controlled doing actually because the parameters and the objectives were there, but the doing built up the experience from which the concepts could then be drawn out and made conscious, if you know what I mean.
Exactly. And how the child feels about the doing is really not, we're not really concerned. I wouldn't say we're completely unconcerned with it, but it's not, that is not the purpose of the lesson.
I know. And it's like, I don't make people cry, I don't.
Exactly.
I don't put people on the spot. That's interesting because when we first came to Canada in the first year we were here, before I did any kind of work outside the home, I volunteered in the kids' school to get to know what the school was all about, etc. And I did quite a few choral projects and some musicianship things with the kids. And I noticed that some of the things I would do by myself and some of the things that the teacher would be in with me and he would want to kind of team do it. And I always had the expectation all the way through that the children will want to do X, Y, and Z, and they won't necessarily have a problem. That doesn't mean that they absolutely won't, and I have contingencies for if they do, but my expectation is that they will be on board. Every single time, that's the expectation.
Right.
So I don't offer them a route out before we've done anything.
Right.
And I was really shocked that instead of expecting and starting an activity, I always start by kind of modeling and doing and not talking about it. So the teacher who was with me, she didn't get into the activity, didn't start doing. She started with a verbal expression of inviting the children to consider whether they wanted to take part or not.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my word, I know. It's like, are you on glue?
I mean, any parent, she could not possibly have been a parent, right? I think there's a big difference between parents who teach and people who have not been parents, because if you've parented at all, you learn rather quickly that when you give your child the opt out, they will take it. Or if you give them too many choices, they'll pick the choice you didn't give them, because the message you're giving is that they have all the choices. So you either give a very narrow, like 2 choices. You may do this or that. And of course, you, the parent, are comfortable with either one. And the same is true for the teachers. And that we've lost this. Well, I want to invite you to come and do this learning. No, you're supposed to lead. The discipline, right? It's the discipleship and discipline. They come from the same root. You are there to lead. You're the mature adult in the room. And what I think Dewey and the progressives and others have done is they've blurred that line. You mentioned it in the last show about, sage on the stage versus the guide on the side. I can't stand that oversimplification that you can't be a guide in the front of the room. Yes, you can. Or that a sage on the stage is bad. There are good ways and bad ways to do it, but they have this binary thinking of the old way is bad, the new way is good because it's new, because it's different. And that's just
Yeah.
not the case. And as I said before, I think it's one of the reasons Americans kind of got snookered into it is that we do have a tendency culturally to be new, better, improved. And that is unfortunate because it's not the case far too often.
No, no, and little kids, and even bigger kids, they don't, unlike adults, they don't go around considering how they feel.
No,
Not when they're left to their own natural way of evolving. They're
no,
not focused that much inwardly on themselves. Their attention is caught by what's going on outside of them,
that's correct.
and they tend to just jump in feet first, or they might be a little apprehensive, and you can see that. You can see it in the body language.
That's
So
right.
you accommodate that, right?
That's right. They're not
But
just
this
adults in little bodies.
No, and that's a great way of putting it, because I think this modern teacher training has given this idea to the teachers coming through that they certainly treat them like that. And that,
Absolutely.
again, for their mental health is incredibly damaging. It's
Adultifying a
stressful.
child is abuse. It's
It
actually
is. It is.
classified as child abuse. And if you've ever, at least where I live, when you go through a divorce, you are required by the court to go through a sort of training to prepare parents for having to share custody. And of course, none of it was new to me, having gone through, my education and working with children. But one of the things they said was you don't triangulate, meaning you don't put the kid in the middle of your fights, and you don't parentify or adultify the child. You don't treat them as an adult. You don't lay adult problems on them. You shield them because they are developmentally incapable of dealing with it. And therefore, if you don't do that, you are abusing them. It's not hitting, but it's still abuse. To put them
Mm-hmm.
into an adult situation like that, it's wrong, and it
Mm.
causes long-term damage, not in every single child, but in too many that you don't want to risk it. And so
No.
it's really, and they're doing this every single day in classrooms around this country, having very small children make the decision to rebel against the most basic thing their parent ever told them: you are my son or you are my daughter.
That's
and
right.
and asking a child what are your pronouns is the first instance sometimes of triangulation the child will experience, and many hundreds more will follow.
That's right. Yeah. So coming back to here, at the end there, that final sentence, well, just before there. So Dewey, he was wanting children to experience freedom and democracy in schools. Freedom and democracy. Yeah, yeah, right. Okay. Shared decision making that we've just spoken about. That's a burden that need not be put on the children. And teachers and students planning together. Students selected topics. All of this has been very, very destructive. Books as tools is an interesting thing rather than authority. Well, this really, it sounds great, doesn't it? That you can cast out these rules, etc. But books as tools rather than authority means that books can no longer transmit essential meaning.
Mm-hmm.
They may as well not be there. If you know what I mean. This is coming into deconstruction here. So you can kind of chop and change and pragmatically use something, but we don't have to say that what's written in that book means absolutely X or Y. And
Yeah.
this brings in the control of language, the King and Ketley book that C.S. Lewis was railing against, that he euphemistically called the Green Book in the Abolition of Man.
Mm-hmm.
That, and I posted from that a lot. And in there are instances of saying there's no fixed meaning to language. It's just a tool to be put to whatever ends you need it to be put to. And this is here. So it's removing the authority from the books. It's a bad
Yep.
thing. Okay, next one. Heresy of modernism is rooted in the philosophical error of immanence, as we've said. So judging something to be good or bad, true or false, based purely on subjective self-reference. How that something makes you feel or affects you personally. And of course, when we get into intersectionality, etc., they really dine out on this. Hypnotism affects or brings about the destruction of reverence toward and respect for what is transmitted. That's exactly what I was just saying. The authority, the essential meaning and message that's in tremendous bodies of knowledge that's been just nullified, year zero style.
Right.
Because instead, through hypnotism, what is allowed is the supplanting instead of a purely self-referential response based in sentiment rather than a rational understanding of what is being communicated. And I haven't got time to kind of share this little anecdote now, but when I was working with education students, I was co-running seminar sessions with the professor of education a few years ago, 2018. And I was expecting the students to work with choral text, which has specific meaning, to be transmitted, and their professor said to them that they should use the text as a kind of jumping off point for subjective response, and that's what should be what is communicated in their work. We absolutely differed, and that was very eye-opening for me, and there was very much the sense of, oh no, we don't deal with text in that way. That hasn't happened for a long time. I think it was clear that I've not been working in universities all the way through, right?
Right.
Because I'm a heretic. Okay. So existentialism as an educational philosophy, just have queer theory in your mind as we read this. So just as its namesake sprang from a strong rejection of traditional philosophy, educational existentialism sprang from a strong rejection of the traditional essentialist approach to education, I would say, or biology as well, or many other things. Existentialism rejects the existence of any source of objective, authoritative truth about metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. Instead, individuals are responsible for determining for themselves what is true, false, right or wrong, beautiful or ugly. For the existentialist, there exists no universal form of human nature. Each of us has the free will to develop as we see fit. Okay. And I've seen debates and all sorts of threads go haywire between kind of anarchic libertarians and classical liberals on how you reconcile that. I've not got involved, but it's, yeah. When you're thinking
Good
of
luck
forms,
with that.
I know, but when you're thinking of forms of governance, they're not reconcilable, are they?
No.
Anyway, I just leave that little seed there. Moving on. So Reconstructionism, critical theory. Social Reconstructionism is a philosophy that emphasizes the addressing of social questions and a quest to create a better society and a worldwide democracy. Reconstructionist educators focus on a curriculum that highlights social reform as the aim of education. Theodor Bramelt was the founder of social Reconstructionism in reaction against the realities of World War II. Well, I would say the reaction against the realities of World War II, that's the kind of buy-in. That's the marketing.
Right.
That's what hooks you in and makes you think, oh, it was for this. Well, if it was for that, yeah, I can get behind it. I understand it then. No, this is the Wundt plan coming through and evolving and shedding its skin and growing a new skin. He reorganized the potential for either, he reorganized, maybe he did actually, maybe that's a Freudian slip. He recognized the potential for either human annihilation through technology and human cruelty, or the capacity to create a beneficent society using technology and human compassion. And then it goes on to accept another one as well. You can read that it cites Paulo Freire and curriculum that focuses on student experience, taking action on social problems, violence, hunger, international terrorism, inflation, inequality, all of the things that are now badged up as sustainable goals, etc.
Right.
So we're looking at inquiry, dialogue, multiple perspectives, community-based learning, bringing the world into the classroom as strategies. Multiple. We're back at your conference. I remember you mentioning
I know,
last
right?
time. I know. So,
What was the
uh,
point? There wasn't a point. That was
no,
intentional.
the virtue was that there was not a point. Get with the program. Yeah.
Exactly.
So George
Exactly.
Counts, this little quote is from him, and there's no need to buy into this. Well, it was to make the world a better place after the war. Trauma, trauma. So now we make it better. We bring the blankie, etc. If the
Right.
school was involved, it could either reflect the knowledge, beliefs, and values of society, so it could stick with tradition, or it could seek to change them. If school teachers were to act as statespersons, then the solving of major issues would result in a new world, new social order. Problem, reaction, solution. All of this is the ruse to bring about the new social order that they've been planning for eons. Okay, we'll go on.
Okay.
So who was he, George Counts? Um, he was heavily influenced by John Dewey and determined to develop the plan for the science of education. The science, but the science says it must be okay, right?
Right. Of course.
Yeah, and his experience in sociology made him concentrate on the sociological dimension of educational research. Well, of course, that's all they wanted it to be about.
Naturally.
First job as head of Department of Education at Delaware, and a job at Harris Teachers College. Went to the University of Washington, went to Yale, returned to the University of Chicago. Long career at the Teachers College at Columbia. What a surprise! He wrote The Principles of Education. It was a philosophical, psychological, and methodological overview of American education. Of course, he's working down in the soil, right? He's
Right.
working with the roots and he's down in the soil. All these guys were, because they knew of the impact they knew what it would do to the trajectory of the plant.
Right.
So his publication favored the philosophy of John Dewey, and he also shared in the child-centered movement in progressive education. Of course he did. Look at what he wrote. Dare the school build a new social order? A pamphlet. Okay, read at national education meetings. Yeah, I know.
And of course, they say it now too. They talk about it now.
I know.
And
This is not.
and if you say, they're trying to build a new social order, oh, stop. You're
Yeah, yeah.
crazy.
Oh, 1932 at national education meetings. One paper was read before the Progressive Education Association at Baltimore, another before the division, the Department of Superintendent in Washington. Look at how this is getting out. Look at the reach. Another before the National Council of Education in Washington. The titles Dare Progressive Education Be Progressive? Education through Indoctrination. Freedom,
Well,
culture, social planning, and leadership. Of course, establishing the leadership was crucial.
of course.
Of course, the
Yes.
next one.
Oh my goodness. And they're just saying it like it's a good thing.
I
We should
know,
indoctrinate the children.
I know, I know.
Did we
So
actually
you,
defeat Hitler? I'm not 100% sure.
no, we
And I
absolutely
don't
did
mean to make
not.
light of that. Obviously, the man was, mass murderer. I'm just saying, ideologically, did we? I'm not
No,
entirely sure
no,
that we did.
no. The parasite from that area came and flourished in science and education and yeah,
Yeah.
all sorts. So before tackling this, I just wanted to say just to remember that it was Dewey's scientific deliberation method for social problem solving. Okay, we solve these problems. We do it with science, so it's great. And that was to reconstruct the social order.
Right.
Um, One of the names that we heard on social reconstructionism was Bramford, and there's an account. I don't know if your listeners and viewers follow Think Before Learning. It's one of my favorite accounts on Twitter.
Hmm.
And Think Before Learning has shared a lot about Bramford and the influence and the work done there. So I forgot to add this actually. Bramford had four particularly key things I just want to read out. Bramford introduced inductive approach to determining social values. So that's Dewey's public democratic deliberation.
Mm-hmm.
Again, Bramford, to building consensus on social policy. That's irrational, subconscious basis. Okay, building consensus.
Right.
The use of defensible partiality in teaching. We don't need to be neutral. There are certain instances where it's absolutely okay not to be neutral, apparently. The organizing of curriculum around social problems, and that then developing into the spokes of a curriculum wheel. And as Think Before Learning shared, they then put up some SEL stuff, which had spokes of a curriculum wheel and all of that kind of thing going on.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to put that in there.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on, perennialism. I guess, it's, sorry, going back one.
Oh,
So
I'm
perennialism is
sorry.
there. That's all right. Yeah. I guess I would be a perennialist, actually. So here, the aim of education is to ensure that students acquire understandings about the great ideas of Western civilization. I don't think that, personally though, I don't think that limits it just to Western civilization. I'd say the
I
great
don't
ideas
either.
of civilization, right? Not
Yep.
just, um,
But
I
they'd
don't
like
like,
to limit it. They'd like to say only Western, so they can then turn around and racialize it
that's
and
right, that's right.
deconstruct it instead of realizing this is accessible to any human being who wants it.
That's right, universal civilization, actually.
Correct.
So, and conservatives are terrible for being all snobby about that kind of thing as
Yeah.
well. I
It's
really
it's
hate that.
ironic that the humanists,
Mm,
the self-proclaimed humanists,
yeah,
are the first ones to say that Western civilization is only for white Europeans.
yeah, exactly, exactly. So the focus is to teach ideas that are everlasting. And this is the really, really key thing to me. Ideas that are everlasting, to seek enduring truths, which are constant, not changing. As a natural and human worlds at their most essential level do not change. And those are the aspects of education that I really want to get to with the work under the soil and a way of expressing that and illustrating that for teachers to come, in a way
Right.
that makes sense now. It
Right.
doesn't sound like you're trying to be very archaic. So teaching these unchanging principles is critical. Um, so we're attaining cultural literacy and stressing students' growth in enduring disciplines. Right, underneath that is actually what I think my education was. So I said before, I was at a comprehensive school. It was an amalgam of secondary modern, which was vocational, and grammar school, which is cognitive. Smush that together, and essentialism. So essentialists believe that there is a common core of knowledge that needs to be transmitted to students in a systematic and disciplined way. I would say that was still happening at my school. The emphasis in this conservative perspective is on intellectual and moral standards that schools should teach. The core of the curriculum is essential knowledge and skills and academic rigor. Although this educational philosophy is similar to perennialism, essentialists accept the idea that this core curriculum may change. Schooling should be practical, preparing students to become valuable members of society. It should focus on facts, the objective reality out there, and the basics, training students to read, write, speak, compute clearly and logically. Schools should not try to set or influence policies. Schools should be taught students should be taught hard work and respect for authority and discipline. Teachers are to help students keep their non-productive instincts in check, such as aggression or mindlessness. Now, on the surface, that sounds good, right? It sounds like what you'd want. And I think to a conservative ear, it's very appealing. But I can spot things in there that are susceptibilities that
Exactly.
can be taken towards progressivism and
Yes.
actually ultimately even taken towards social reconstructivism and critical theory.
Well, they're quite
Um,
authoritarian.
they
And,
are,
we can sit here and we can critique the affective learning model and the student directed learning model, but that does not mean that have thrown self determination out the window, or because that's the missing component here. The student is missing from this. This is all about obeying and lining up and doing what you're told when you're told, respect for authority. There are degrees. There's a lot of context missing. There are times and places to respect authority, and then there are times to question it. Inside the classroom, when you're discussing ideas, is a time to question it. No, you may not just get up and leave the room randomly because that creates chaos. Is not one of the times to question it. But they have this again, binary. this or that. And to your point, you hear conservatives all the time today saying, yeah, we need to bring back the old way of this and that. And I'm thinking, well, why though? It's the why that matters.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Why are you doing it? Is it just cosmetic? Is it just decorative?
Right.
Or is it functional? Okay. So essentialists accept the idea that this core curriculum may change. Well, a lot of change can go on underneath the hood again. That core curriculum could become a core critical curriculum in the
Which is
future.
exactly what happened.
Exactly. And okay, preparing students to become valuable members of society. Well,
To whom?
that
By whose
exactly.
estimation?
Okay. So training, so schools, what's this? Respect for authority. Um, okay, so respect for pronouns, respect for being an ally, respect, this authoritarian respect can be manipulated and taken in all sorts of directions.
Exactly.
Teachers are there to keep their non-productive instincts in check. So non-productive could be you
According to
haven't
whom?
struggled.
Right.
Yeah, you've
Exactly.
not, you're resisting the struggle.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So this can all be purposed towards social justice.
Exactly.
Because I kind of smelt that whiff off it when I first read it. I thought, hang on. And to me, this seems to be the bridge to take progressivism through. It's got the potential for transformation. And I think a
Exactly.
lot of this kind of bait and switch hoodwinking of a traditional or conservative mindset has happened. Things have been sold in a way that sound great on the surface, the veneer, but they've got this operational capacity to completely change while people don't notice because all they can see is the veneer. And I
Yes.
think this has been sold at the political level all the time. These great sounding things, and at the point at which these things are bought into, there aren't enough people with the understanding to say, hang on, so how are you going to prevent this? So where's your limiting principle on that?
Yep.
Or if there are, there's too much money invested in selling the thing anyway. So they're just kind of humored and told to go away, or they're, they're not allowed to be at the table having the discussion.
Right.
But anyway, when I kind of thought this is not what it says on the tin, I thought, who's William Bagley? Who is he? Let's look at him and who were his influences. Well, he traces right back to Wilhelm Wundt. His lineage is absolutely Wundt. So I was
Yeah.
right. He took progressivist approaches. Yes, he did. And he rebranded them and changed the look of them and put them into kinetic form, if you like, their potential form,
Right.
and hid them, to my mind, anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next one. So we're back to B.K. Eekman, the lady who had been in teaching, and she had seen all of the mental health stuff come in. And so I went on this other route, to Germany, to Leipzig, and the inception of the teacher training system and the build out of that, just to try and fill in the blanks for people on how we got to then what she was experiencing. So, but walking targets, government-controlled child rearing, it force feeds this pseudo-education under the cover of mental health.
Right.
What we're talking about is social planning and ideological capture. And I think a lot of parents, we've experienced, you and I have shared that we've experienced this, woke up one morning to see children who were nothing like them, people they didn't know, and who didn't share even what few values they had left. Now, it's not as extreme as that in our family and not in yours, but it is for many families. And it's tearing the social fabric apart right now.
Yes, it is.
So it's interesting, she says that what she saw going on comprises historically the formative stages of a police state.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so moving on. She only spent 9 years as a classroom teacher and then got out. What she saw was, this is interesting to me, fewer and fewer teachers were pursuing an academic major. Most of the teachers were majoring just simply in that new science of education.
Right.
which meant psychology, social work. And of course, if you're not taking an academic or subject domain degree prior to then perhaps going on to do something in education, what are you taking into the classroom in terms of subject domain knowledge?
Yes.
How can you really equip the children with the foundational skills that they need? How can you diagnostically look at what the children are missing in their foundational development and then quickly know how to help them and support them at that level? If you don't, if you've not come through rigorous subject domain specialism yourself, then all you can do really is take a pre-done scheme of work and okay, I'm not, yeah, you'll have a certain degree of knowledge as a generalist, but you're not you're not well equipped to support the children where they're at and take them on, right, and help them
Right.
overcome whatever issues and problems and difficulties that they have. So I definitely saw that when I was first involved in teaching. Every single person in the first school I ever worked at had come from a science degree, an English degree, all these different degrees. And actually, they'd come from business as well. I worked at it was a city technology college. That's, and they really valued employing people who'd come from business and industry with a wealth of knowledge that they could impart to the children. And they supported them in their classroom management
Right.
and everything. So they kind of have mentorship to segue into the teaching role. And people were applying because they wanted to teach, even though they'd never been a teacher before. But they came with
Exactly.
great knowledge and skills and expertise and a um, genuine like of kids and students and wanting the best for them. So it was really just practice and habit to really pick up the classroom side, the management side of things.
Right.
Um, and yet that kind of classroom management side is so heavily fetishized in the teacher training programs. It's be all and end all. Whereas the subject domain specialism is hardly there at all.
Right.
Okay, so moving on. Um, just a very simple, we all have good days, bad days. Life's experiences contribute to how a particular individual, child or adult, is going to perceive information and react to events. You have people who've been through incredible suffering, and yet they come through their ordeals mentally intact. And today's youngsters, on the other hand, are supposedly traumatized by a parent who is controlling or a teacher who is harsh. And there's no medical explanation for these disparate reactions, but psychology appears determined to find one. PTSD for things that are not really, worthy of PTSD. Conduct disorders put you on a concerning, what is it called? My daughter got put on one once in her first year in kindergarten.
Oh, an EIP, like an
Uh,
or IEP rather.
concerning
Uh, uh,
behavior pathway. She had
oh,
glue
okay.
ear, right? She had glue ear, and she was all the time off in her imagination because she
Okay.
couldn't hear terribly well. We did get her a hearing aid for a while, but she developed her imagination and she liked quite heavy physical play because sensorily she was deprived at that stage. And she used to much more enjoy the rough, tough running around, which the boys enjoyed, less so the girls. So, she was kind of influenced socially by that rough and tumble stuff, and she would tune in and tune out, and because her language development was delayed, and so yeah, she went right on the concerning behavior pathway.
Right.
And it was only really getting her out of what was a huge joining together of two classrooms, a very noisy environment, and then being able to have her moved into a very small class, very
Yep.
few children, take out the hearing aid, and have much more of that one-on-one attention and no concerning behavior.
Yep.
Okay, so we'll go on. So things like logic and philosophy and civics, which once helped kids get a handle on modern issues, are practically gone. So there was nothing supporting ideals like self-reliance, property rights, limited government, or religious morality in society. Those things have been taken away. So if we move on, what we find is that kids were just left without this foundational reference for development. Sorry,
Hmm.
there's some noise above me. Can you hear that?
It
Can you
sounds
hear
like
it?
somebody's moving around up there. Yeah.
Okay. Is it too obstructed? Is it? Is it bad? Do I need to go and tell them to
No, it's
stop?
no, it's fine.
Okay, I
It's not
apologize
too
for that.
bad.
Okay. Okay.
It's
All right.
okay.
Okay. Yes, there's no frame of reference for healthy development at all. And if you look at when she's talking here about in her Cloning of the American Mind book, eradicating morality through education, she was looking at the experiments of the people who were establishing predictive markers for behavior for mental illness. So it's like you take this foundations for healthy development away, what's going to happen to the behavior? Oh, and now we're going to label that behavior as markers so that we can then diagnose you with mental illness. And who was working on this creation of signals and markers for mental illness? Wilhelm Reich, Lewin, Adorno, Fromm. You read down the list. But what I want to draw your attention to, and I think it's worth noticing, is what I've underlined in green, the countries where this was happening. Germany, Great Britain, Italy, Canada, Russia, US. Look at the reach of this monster that's being
Yes.
established.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then you think about the military intelligence, the role of that in this, and these countries. So it's just awful that what they were building out here. Okay.
Right.
This lent legitimacy to otherwise questionable illnesses. How did they get around that? Well, there were people working on medicalized terminologies of psychology and establishing a system of numerical codes for computerization. And if insurance companies and government agencies accepted these codes, the same as they would for type 2 diabetes, then mental illnesses so codified would become credible. Are you hearing the insurance money here?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
And we see
Okay.
that now where they are linking Medicaid in the United States directly to schools so that schools can direct bill for medical services at the school from the school. They don't have to go through
That's
the
right.
parents. They can just provide that directly at the school. I've tried to explain to people that one of the first things Hitler did was he dissolved the family unit as the center. He kept talking about how great the family was, how great the family was. But what he really meant was that parents producing children were serving the Reich, right? You know, they were just breeders basically. But he would then take the children from infancy, okay, and put them in schools, put them in places where they'd spend all day with other caregivers, other teachers. Mothers did not have the luxury, unless they were in his in crowd, of raising their own children or choosing their own caregivers. No, the state would do that for you. So they provided all. They provided everything from the bottles of milk to feed the babies to, medical care to everything. You just drop off your child and go work for the Reich at whatever job that you were now given. And in many cases, because they were coming out of a terrible economy, they were like, oh, yeah, I have a job. But they didn't question the notion that somebody else was quite literally raising their children. And
No,
now
well,
we see that happening here. They want universal preschool
yep,
and the medicalization of the K-12 environment.
that's right. Whole school, what's it called?
Whole
Kelly
school,
has
whole
done.
child, whole
That's
community,
right.
or whole
That's
student,
right.
whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And very, very much coming down the pipeline, right?
Yes.
Very much in
And it's
process.
it's 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 practically mirror image of what he did. And people will split hairs and say, "Oh yes, but it's not Hitler doing it or it's not a, megalomaniac doing it." I would beg to differ about that. But anyway, it's it, does it really matter? I don't care. This is what C.S. Lewis was so great about, that he would prefer the tyrant to the moralizing, meddling busybodies, who know what's
Yes.
best for everybody. And does it need to be a psychopath? Anybody who presumes to know what's best for every child from birth onward is, in my opinion, a kind of psychopath, or at least a
Yeah.
sociopath.
Yeah. No, that's right. No, okay. So we see the scope there, and we see where it's going with the money and the industries and the legitimizing of it being medicalized. Okay,
Right.
moving on.
Okay.
So here, the World Federation of Mental Health, the conferences that were held in London in 1940 and 45. And the goals and objectives were laid out. None of this is hidden. So if people are really saying, nah, that's tinfoil hat, nah, you might want to direct them to here. And I'll just pull up my source for this as well, in case people think she's just photoshopped that. Look at that while I read it out. Okay. It's the Citizens Commission on Human Rights. Okay, that's where I got this from. Citizens Commission on Human Rights. Brigadier John Rawlings Rees. He was involved with military intelligence. He was a psychologist, psychiatrist, and he was very much involved in, well, fingers in many pies, but looking also at what was happening to returning servicemen after their experience of trauma. There's a lot of research on that, as there always is, isn't there, when there are conflicts. But just listen to what he has to say here. John Rawlings Rees. We can therefore justifiably stress our particular point of view with regard to the proper development of the human psyche, even though our knowledge be incomplete. Okay, so we're with this newfangled new science that we separated out of the academy. We're still within the academy, so you know we're proper, but we created our own little department so we don't have to play by the rules of anyone else, right? Even though our knowledge be incomplete, we must aim to make it permeate. Hello, that's a Fabian strategy. We must make it permeate every educational activity in our national life. We have made a useful attack on a number of professions. The two easiest of them, naturally, are the teaching profession and the church. The two most difficult are law and medicine. And that came from Strategic Planning for Mental Health, 1940. Well, they have come on leaps and bounds with law and medicine now, haven't they?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, witness Stanford a few months ago. And then we've got the Canadian psychiatrist, Brock Chisholm, president of the World Federation of Mental Health in 1945. He proclaimed the reinterpretation and eventually eradication of the concept of right and wrong, which has been the basis of child training. The substitution of intelligent and rational thinking for faith are the belated objectives of practically all effective psychotherapy. Let me unpack that a little bit. So we're getting rid of the concept of right and wrong, and we saw that existentialist education philosophy does that. So right and wrong is no longer the basis of child training. We are going to put what we think of as intelligent, rational thinking. We're going to put that in. It's not intelligent or rational, but we're going to badge it up as that, using sciencey kind of language. And we're going to remove faith, because in their minds, faith means superstition. Well, that's the way they frame it to a population who also want to get rid of faith, who think faith is superstition. Actually, they know that faith contains aspects of intelligent and rational thinking, and it's that they really want to get rid of. Does that make sense? They're doing like a double-led thing there.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, that's what the progressives were, not the progressives, the postmodernists wanted to resuscitate religion by, I believe, illustrating that reason was bad, basically.
Yeah.
Reason and logic and the Enlightenment was wrong.
That's right. Well, get a load of this. The fact is that most psychiatrists and psychologists and other respectable people,
other respectable people, I would just wave a magic wand and you have a job title and you're respectable.
Yeah,
that's fabulous.
And other respectable people, the anointed, I think, have escaped. They've escaped from these moral chains.
Oh, poor babies.
And are able to observe and think freely. I think he might be talking about Harari ethics there, just because it can be done, and therefore it's fine to be done.
Yes.
So they're able to observe and think freely. A year later, Chisholm wrote again about the eradication of right and wrong conduct. The pretense is made, as it has been made in relation to the finding of any extension of truth. Oh, hello, truth is gone now. We just killed truth. So that to do away with right and wrong would produce uncivilized people, immorality, lawlessness, and social chaos. No shit, Sherlock. The fact is, most psychiatrists and psychologists and other respectable people have escaped from the moral chains and are able to think freely. So, okay, we're going to get rid of truth, and we're going to do away with right and wrong. Of course, that's not going to produce uncivilized people, immorality, lawlessness, and social chaos. No, no. Well, we've been watching an experiment in real time since then, haven't we?
Well, I mean, this is just extraordinary. The family is now one of the major obstacles to improve mental health and hence should be weakened if possible, so as to free individuals and especially children from the coercion of family life. International
Mm.
Congress on Mental Health, 1948, in London. To achieve world government, it is necessary to remove from the minds of men their individualism, loyalty to the family traditions, national patriotism, and religious dogmas. There's Chisholm, okay? And then few legislators passed these mental health laws realized that Brock Chisholm and his associates define mental illness as a state of loyalty to a particular nation. We're going there, Christine. We are
I
going there.
know.
What have we been hearing all last week with our own attorney general? And he still stands by the original letter, saying that we should look into these parents who are so naughty to criticize their school
Yeah,
boards and their school districts. They think we're sick. They
they
think that
do.
there's something wrong with us if we dare to be loyal to each other, to be loyal to the ideas of, this nation or to the nation itself. Reading this now, they're just slightly more direct and honest than
Mm-hmm.
the people today. That's the only difference. These are the same messages we're hearing today. Education should aim at destroying free will so that after pupils are thus schooled, they will be incapable throughout the rest of their lives of thinking, acting otherwise than as their schoolmasters would have wished. And now we have the social emotional learning, which I know we're coming to, where they talk about the predictive learning, and they want to make sure that they're only a certain number of thoughts and behaviors that are appropriate so we can just train children from the youngest age to be socially acceptable, and not just that, but fulfill the needs of the new labor force,
Yeah.
the 21st century labor force. It is so sinister and creepy, and it's a miracle. You know what the miracle is to me? The miracle is that they have been at this project since 1897 and saying these things and working on these things. And as fast as it seems to some parents that they've moved, it's actually rather slow. It has taken them this long, over 100 years, to get there. And they've been working at it pretty steadily, but you know, it wasn't overnight. It
No,
wasn't
it
overnight.
wasn't. It wasn't. And when you look at each of these successive phases of it, as the phase of the parasite, as it sheds its skin and renews itself, um, they each one maximizes susceptibilities even more, and
Yes.
then reduces and messes with immunity. So it breaks down your immunity a little bit more, so that you end up accepting what the previous generation might not have accepted, but it all sounds good to you,
Sure. Yeah.
progress. So it's long stage grooming, okay. And every government that has been in charge of education for more than one generation will be able to control its subjects securely without the need of armies or policemen. Bertrand
Yep.
Russell, quoting Fichte, the head of philosophy and psychology who influenced Hegel and others, right? And I know there's a lot of people in probably your community and on Twitter that I interact with that are well versed on the influence of Hegel. Okay,
Yes.
moving on.
Exactly.
These lovely
Okay.
German influences, hey?
Oh, yes.
Education does not mean teaching people to know what they do not know. It means teaching them to behave as they do not behave. Get with the program, plebs. National Institute of Mental Health sponsored report, The Role of Schools in Mental Health. The education system should be a sieve through which all the children of a country are passed.
Oh
It is
my
highly
God.
desirable that no child should escape. No child should escape.
No
No
child
child left
left
behind.
behind.
Yeah.
Oh
Okay,
God,
and
I'm
that's
not
a lovely
laughing because it's
person.
funny. I'm
I
laughing because it's
know, I know.
tragic.
I know. So who says that? Well, a behavioral eugenicist says that.
That's
Someone
right.
who co-authored Sterilization for Human Betterment. They've really refined sterilization now, haven't they? They really do it in a way just none of us would have thought 10 years ago that this was coming. Okay, so
Yeah.
this is a little example of their language, right? they say one thing and you have a smile on your face because you think it means one thing, and yet actually they're being absolute bastards. Despite rapid progress in the right direction, well, what is the right direction? Follow my little yellow line down. The right direction, according to them, what they call good teaching, is a teacher's ability to obtain affective objectives
Make the
by
kids
challenging,
feel what you want
yep,
them to feel,
by
which is so
challenging the
much more
students.
important than getting them to
Yeah,
think anything. It would be fine if their
absolutely.
brains were absolutely empty of thoughts as long as they feel the right feelings. And I have a
Yeah.
friend, Barbara, who says, and I always quote this because it's so brilliant. She says, you have to have the right thoughts before you can have the right feelings, or the right facts, rather, before you can have the right feelings, meaning that, by not teaching them any facts, their feelings
Mm-hmm.
are more than likely incorrect to the circumstance. The cognitive distortion is going to be off the charts because what you feel about a thing should be a function of what you know about it.
Well, we're right
Otherwise,
back here with Dewey.
exactly.
Just
Otherwise,
just
you're
experiment.
just
Yeah.
you're just wrong.
Yeah, that's right. And so to obtain affective objectives by challenging students' fixed beliefs, we're going to pull what they know of the world completely apart.
Yeah,
You know, we're psychological abuse.
it is.
Your friend. She's absolutely right. That's what I learned about from the Thomistic teaching is that the mental health is the health of the intellect. It starts with the intellect. That is where it starts. And I get a lot of pushback sometimes on Twitter. Because no, it's just about you talk about intellect too much in relation
Ugh,
to religion and stuff. It should just be your personal relationship with X, Y, Z. Your how you feel. It's an intangible thing. It's just an intuition. It's just something you
I
know. And I'm like,
no,
no,
no, it's
no, it's
not.
not. And I found it so the Catholic intellectual tradition really helped sort this out for me. That it's what you know, what you can establish by your intellect, by your reason, first of all, that then equips you to go out and test that. Is that,
Precisely.
test it? Is that true? Hypothesis, and keep
Right.
refining and keep testing. Doesn't
And
mean that you have a divine download of knowledge.
right.
I just know because I know. No, rubbish.
And we're
But we're
teaching
talking about
children to have
scientific.
cognitive distortion
We
when
are,
we,
yes.
yeah, it was so rather than, and I've actually had people do this for me in my life. And I myself went through something called cognitive behavioral therapy to deal with some PTSD that I went through. And it was the best thing ever because I was walking around having emotional reactions to things that weren't even real. There were fears. There were me putting ideas in my head about what might happen, what could happen, what I
Mm-hmm.
imagined was somebody was thinking. And so my closest friends and the people I rely on the most are the people, even to this day, if I get frustrated by something, their gut check is, okay, back up. What are the facts? What do you know to be true versus what are you afraid might be true? Or what are
Mm.
you imagining is happening or going to happen? And what actually is happening? And that usually, now it just stops me in my tracks. And if it even happens, which it happens, it happens very seldom now. But now I stop and think, oh, thank you. You're right. I was getting ahead of myself. We need to be doing that for our children. And instead, we're doing the exact opposite.
That's right. That's right. Well, look at what this is Edward Lee Thorndike, pioneer of animal psychology, that's saying these words. So despite rapid progress in the right direction, the program of the average elementary school has been primarily devoted to teaching the fundamental subjects, the three R's, and closely related disciplines. So apparently that's a bad thing, according to him,
Right.
right? And he calls these methodologies artificial exercises. Drills, phonetics, multiplication tables, formal writing movements, all these things which we know build the foundations, right? They build the foundations of fluency, and thereby fluency can yield understanding, which ultimately yields comprehension. Without those initial building blocks, you don't have access to those subsequent developments, those higher concepts, right? So these these foundational aspects, they are used to a wasteful degree. Subjects such as arithmetic, language, history include content that is intrinsically of little value. Nearly every subject is enlarged unwisely to satisfy the academic ideal of thoroughness, elimination of the unessential by scientific study. So we are going to gut and remove the essential cognitive development aspects of the curriculum, the essential foundational knowledge of who we are, what we are, where we've come from, how that's happened. We're going to remove that because it's apparently unessential, and we're going to claim that we're doing that by scientific study. That'll be your new science then, the one where you go and play over there by your own rules.
Exactly.
And that's one step in improving the curriculum. Can you imagine? So you have this bullshit like this spouted out at professional development things, and because it comes under the title of improving the curriculum, teachers just go, oh, improving the curriculum, yeah, okay. And these ideas, they don't sound exactly like this now, but they're still doing the same thing. It's the same dynamic. It's the same wrecking ball to the integrity of curriculum that's happening all the time. So a student, and this is awful as an expert, a student attains higher order thinking. That's not either or, but it's both and, because it's synthesis.
Right.
Okay, a student attains higher order thinking when he no longer believes in right or wrong.
I'm speechless.
A large part of what we call good teaching is the teacher's ability to obtain affective objectives by challenging the student's fixed beliefs. So we're going to manipulate them emotionally, and we're going to give them sub-story scenarios about things, or we're going to frighten them, or we're going to and manipulate their responses to things in order to break down and destroy what they thought was right or wrong, their fixed beliefs, which, by and large are coming from the family.
Exactly.
The teacher should be able to use education to reorganize a child's thoughts, attitudes, and feelings. Hello, cell. Hello, CRT.
Right.
Okay.
That's what it is.
It's just terrible. And then I couldn't resist doing an opposite day reworking of the social emotional learning. You remember when they started to realize that people were seeing them for what they really were?
Yep.
And they put out these little pieces.
But it's a lie. Every single one of these is a flagrant lie, and everything on the left should tell you that. And if you read anything about the people who created Castle and Castle itself, and you read their own research, they know they're lying. It's not that they're mistaken or they're delusional or something. They know they are lying.
They do know they're lying, and these guys here way back when knew they were lying. But this is the whole thing of pragmatism. Pragmatism as a philosophical mode. That is, ideas do not need to be true or false. They do not need to be good or bad. They just need to be able to progress an agenda, to attain a goal. And there's no ethics involved there. They just need to advance operational success. Okay, does it get me what I want?
Exactly.
Ends justify the means. So they use these ideas and they use them cynically. They're not true believers. But of course, the people that they push them on, the administration, the teachers, unfortunately, if they're not questioning and they're not thinking for themselves, they swallow it passively and they believe the marketing spin. Okay, we'll move on. Exactly. We're near the end, Deb. Don't worry. There's light at the end of the tunnel.
I would like to take this opportunity to thank the audience for sticking with us. And I know, you know what, but Christine, it's long, but how else? I hope people listening realize there is no other way to explain this to you. I mean, we have to show you this quantity of information, or what? Would you believe us?
I know.
I mean, I really don't think they would believe us.
Yes. This is scratching the surface, really. So we're looking at the incarnations of mental health movement. This lady saw that there's the humanistic movement, the self-esteem movement. That's the one I go on about a lot. Things called schools without failure, psycholinguistics, all this kind of stuff to do with emotional well-being of children and the fads and fancies of child experts, okay, that they were more important than the emotional well-being of children.
Right.
And look down here at the very bottom. So we've got the fact that the process, rather, of humanizing education, in that students were being subjected to far worse stress at the hands of their classmates than they'd ever experienced under the guidance of caring parents. Classrooms just became a nightmare. Just discipline went and nothing was focused. So we've got here eradication of dress codes, disrespect for the flag and the armed services, the eradication of prayer, and then it all can be traced to the various incarnations of the mental health movement. So if I see someone saying, oh, we should get prayer back in schools, or they should respect the flag, and yes, more mental health services for children in schools, please. I'm like, oh dear. Yeah. Okay, next one. Sorry, go back one. I just saw a sentence that I meant to pick out for you. It's super quick. Okay, look at this. In a document in 1981, a working paper from the National Institute of Education, measuring the quality of education, the goal of excellence was called unrealistic, and it was recommended that it be changed to functionality. Okay, just leave that there. Sorry, we'll move on now.
Okay.
Moving on, I'll skip that one. Yeah, so she's saying here that she felt that the government was poised to make an enemy combatant of every political incorrect parent, child, and potential employee by the system of dubious and connected mental health profiles. Well, we're there, right?
Right.
We're there with children being taken away from parents and the treatment of parents speaking up at school board meetings, etc. That's already here.
Yes.
So she asks at the end, will the various pieces of legislation that psychologize and further politicize, the key, our educational institutions, prove to be the final nails in the coffin for the American way of life, turning this nation into a bona fide American gulag?
Yep.
They're certainly going that way. Okay, and on. America gave up the 3 R's and got back the 3 I's. Ignorance, illiteracy, and illegitimacy. Okay,
Yep.
we'll go on. Okay, so this again is bringing out this aspect of Americans, I would say Westerners. Westerners were vulnerable to the arguments of behavioral psychologists. You know, these people have been held up as experts, and their literature proliferated, articles and books, spreading these unworkable philosophies of child management. But it's amazing that, you know, people working in the system, they never kind of, not they never, it did happen, but by and large, they were just swallowed.
Yep.
So this message that children needed to eschew adult guidance and leadership, and of course that links in there with the Freirean teacher co-learner thing, flattening out the hierarchy, which was all throughout business HR stuff as well, flatten the hierarchy, which is all a sham. The hierarchy always was still there, but you know, you pander and you humor.
Exactly.
And then this came through later in the colleges of education and educational psychology, which has been a terrible pseudoscience as well. Okay, next one. So teachers that could smell the BS were getting very frustrated and leaving the system, checking out, which is terrible because, you know, you want the very capable ones in there, but it, you know, I couldn't stay in situations where I wasn't allowed to teach. I kind of worked around that by, you know, if some of the school or college that I was involved in was kind of going that way, I moved. I looked for another route because I just wasn't going to give my time, waste the time in a situation where I couldn't teach, right?
Exactly.
And even here, very importantly, some of the private schools also coasted downhill. So you in the 1970s, teachers, what you need to do is forego the standards of excellence in favor of giving everyone a taste of success. It's not a taste of success. It's just a little lollipop or something. It's humoring them. It's patronizing them.
Right.
So public schools and even some private ones went downhill on this mediocrity slope. It hurt both teachers and students. This lie of positive feedback, it was very detrimental. The instant success led to demoralizing effect and apathy. This happened in the first job I was in. They brought in positive discipline, and we all had to go and attend these PD sessions, which basically meant that you had to lie to students And you had to, instead of addressing any behavior, unwanted behavior at the time, quickly, efficiently done with, you were supposed to wait in silence. Just wait. I'm sure you've met that kind of thing before. And you're
Right.
only supposed to use very positive language, no matter what was being done in the classroom. You had to find a way of couching it in a positive language. Terrible. I left that school because I refused to do that to students, lie to them.
Right.
Okay, so teachers were ending up feeling frustrated and drained, emotionally drained, feeling like they're babysitters and entertainers. Okay, moving on. Trauma. We've heard
Oh
that
my
word a lot.
God.
I just wanted to pop this in here to prove that trauma-based programming were actual things. The Arizona Adverse Childhood Experiences Consortium.
They're giving
Again,
children
from
ACE scores now. They're giving them
yeah,
scores when they come in to kindergarten. Every single child gets an ACE score. So, how many adverse childhood experiences they have per the school, per the government, and or, and it's well perception, it's subjective. Whatever the evaluator is going to decide is either a literal or perceived adverse experience is going to go down on their score, and their score will determine whether they're tier 1, tier 2, or what tier they are for quote unquote supports, and so on and so forth. Every child is going to walk through that door and have a score.
and is that the data captured from that? Does that
Of
feed into a
course.
rubric that then
Absolutely.
unlocks money? Yeah, I
Yes.
thought it would. Yeah.
It
Okay.
unlocks money, but it also goes into a database that is stored for the child's entire lifetime, at least 70 years.
Good grief. So can they therefore then perpetually market stuff to them? Market,
Yes, and it's more to the point, they can market them and their
yeah,
data to other
yeah,
people. It's less about marketing to the child or even to the child's parents, although that is part of it, and more about selling the child as a commodity
yes.
and the child's data, which of course is then going to, which came first, the chicken or the egg? If we decide we have a child with a certain ACE score, and we then decide that children with certain A scores can be predicted based on our predictive technology to do this well or this not well or that not well. And we feed them customized, individualized lessons technologically, which they're now doing. How many doors are we slamming in this child's face based on the subjective opinion of the very first evaluator they cross paths with? And at no time will
Mm-hmm.
their parents be able to see or even understand the complicated algorithms that have been used to design their customized little electronic curriculum that is going to be a subset of all the knowledge and skills they could possibly ever learn, geared towards fitting them properly into their place in the 21st century labor force.
This is an ontology of mental health, isn't it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is subscribing the walls of their universe.
That is correct.
These are the prison bars.
And
Okay.
anyone who resists is going to be deemed oppositionally defiant, possibly suffering from mental illness, generalized anxiety. Well, they'll need to be medicated, of course, or talked to by
Yes.
the counselor. And their parents, well, golly gee, we may just have to put them in a file at the Department of Justice to be monitored for their subversive activities, thoughts, words, etc.
Yes, and this is more mental health in schools.
Yes.
This is where it goes.
Yes. And
Um,
I can't tell you how many parents I've talked to where I try to explain to them this is not, there's no opt out, there's no paper you can sign, there's no amount of oversight you can provide, there's no camera in the classroom that's going to protect your child. There are things going on within the technology your child is handed that you'll never really see or understand that are
mm,
doing the heavy lifting of this work. It's not
hmm
a curriculum. They're still thinking whenever I talk to parents, like, well, I want to see the curriculum or show me the lesson plans. And I feel like they've gone through a time war back 30 or 40 years. Teachers haven't
hmm
submitted lesson plans since I went to grad school. I got
mm.
out in 1990 and we weren't submitting lesson plans. So
This is a
you don't,
common problem because
yeah.
people are just thinking about school as they remembered it themselves
That's right.
and
And they
projecting
don't,
that now.
yeah, they're projecting that into that's how it is. And they're asking for things that no longer exist. And rather than tell them this no longer exists, they'll say, fill out a FOIA request or, send an
Mm,
email or, they don't even go to the trouble of telling the parent that's not how school works anymore. We don't even do that.
yeah. But the administration, they know how to give you the runaround and keep you very busy,
Very, very
looking for
busy and
stuff that
costing you
isn't
a lot
there.
of time and money so
Mm,
that you just don't bother doing it, or they'll just sue you.
that's right. I'll just read on. I won't read all of the next bit. It's Lewis again. Yeah, but in a word, we may reasonably hope for the virtual abolition of education when I'm as good as you has fully had its way. All incentives to learn and all penalties for not learning will vanish. We will no longer have a plan to toil to spread imperturbable conceit and incurable ignorance among men. The little vermin will do it for us. This is from Screwtape, of course.
Yes, of
I,
course.
I also can agree with and shudder at his concluding statement. Of course, this would not follow unless all education became state education, but it will.
And that is why I oppose school choice. And people are always saying,
Yes.
but how could you? Don't you support a parent's right to determine what their child's education should be? Why do you equate the two? Why are you saying that supporting a parent's right to determine how their child should be educated equates to what they call school choice? It does not. School
Mm,
choice is a government run program. It's government administered, government determined, government law sets it in place, monitors it, et cetera. And I've yet to see people say, well, they're good laws, they're good bills that put up guardrails against the government encroaching into the private sector. There's no such thing. First of all, they are going to, the creditors are in bed with the government standards or want to be. Schools are voluntarily getting accredited even when they don't have to, because they know without that they won't get access to the government vouchers and so on. Even if it's not written in the bill today, it will be, because the second it's exposed to the voting public, you'll have the teachers unions and other people coming in to say, there's no oversight. It's taxpayer dollars. You need the government to have oversight. And no, this private Catholic school is getting taxpayer dollars. Don't you want to know what they're teaching? And the tragedy of it is, yes, I do. As a taxpayer, I do. I don't want my taxpayer dollars going to the Bill and Melinda Gates School for the Greater Humanity or the Theosophist Society Academy of being a dumbass.
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't want my tax dollars paying for the mutilation of a child's mind. So
Mm,
yes, I'm going to demand restrictions, and I'm not even shy about saying so. So what I would advise people instead is to want something more akin to education liberty, which is abolition of the government monopoly on the system in the first place, the destruction of the system. It shouldn't even exist. And for that, I'm
yes.
called an insane person. This
Oh,
to me is
dear.
insane. What we were looking at the screen, this is insanity. I believe that I am speaking sense.
Mm, you are. I'm sure Lewis said something about the one person that speaks sense against the multitude that are not even seeing sense. But, anyway, we'll keep going. We're near the end, Deb. Hold on.
We're almost there.
Okay. Yeah. Um, okay. Yeah, I think this is just saying the same thing again. We've got Bertrand Russell saying the impact of home is prohibit, basically get the impact of home out of the way. So here we've got B.K. Eekman finishing up, and she brings in here at the top of this little excerpt. Some people like her changed professions, lashed out at parents, and or some people lashed out at parents and administrators. This spurred union membership. Oh look, union membership is being spurred on by conflict. Who'd have thought that, hey?
Right.
So from teachers' unions, like the National Education Association, they emanated a never-ending stream of rabble-rousing leaflets. Look, they stoke it all up in
Right.
teachers' mailboxes, which in the end further alienated parents from their schools. Gradually, social adjustment and behavioral goals took the place of academics. Today, education is not about literacy. It's not about proficiency at anything. It's not about basics or core curriculum or skills or jobs. It's about mental health, stupid.
And that's 1993.
Yeah, it is. It
That's
is. Let's go.
and for those who didn't learn math in school while they were busy worrying about your mental health,
Coloring
that's
pictures.
not 10 years ago. It's just so you know. Just so we're clear. I
Yeah.
can't tell you how many people have said that. Oh gosh, that's only 10 years ago. And I'm like, no. No, it's
That's because
not.
we don't realize how old we are, you see. Okay, let's go. Next one.
Okay.
Right.
Oh,
Again,
I
I'm
love
not.
Samuel Blumenfeld.
I wondered if you knew him. I love him too. I took his essay, Who Killed Excellence in Education, and it
Yes.
formed the first half of a huge John Dewey 55 tweet thread that I put up. Can you
Bless
imagine?
you.
55 tweet
Bless
thread.
you.
Some people actually read all the way through. They deserved a medal.
Yes.
But the second half of the thread had an essay which I chunked up about the relationship of Dewey to Mao. And I've not touched on that here, but essentially Dewey went and gave lectures in China, and Mao was really impressed. And Dewey's lectures on social policy and progressive education really influenced Mao. So people don't see that piece of the picture as well.
No.
They're
Well, they
starting to
don't know
become
anything about
very
Mao. They
no,
did.
and
They just skipped it. They red washed the entire curriculum in America.
that's right. But if people want to know about, and Dewey, of course, he was tasked with um, putting an American kind of flavor onto Marxism, making Marxism palatable for an American sensibilities,
Mm-hmm.
American tastes, in what he was doing in education. So my huge, great big tweet thread, if people care to ever look for it, or just hit me up, DM me or something, and say what, send me that thread. It has these two incredible essays that once you come out of reading them and digesting them, I think you'll be forever changed, and it'll put a lot of the pieces into place for you. But look at this. In Dewey's words, learning to read in early school life because of the great importance attached to literature seems to me a great perversion. Dewey argued that a high literacy rate bred a destructive individualism. Yeah, destructive to those that want to destroy the Constitution,
A
etc.
high literacy rate breeds a destructive individualism.
And this is your father of American education here.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
and just contrast that with when we get to the very last slide, almost, with the view of the role of literature
Yes.
in development. Okay, let's go. I just put here two other essays from UK Column. Remember, I put some at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Because Brian Gerrish, who was one of the founders of UK Column, he's got lots of lectures online, and one of them made a real impact on me a number of years ago, political ponerology. And he really understands the occult piece in political warfare, psychological warfare. So from magic to madness, government's NLP assault on our minds, and the psychological attack on the UK. That is great, and that has great reference to other sources as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, moving on. Behavioral change and a common purpose. They've done deep dives on UK Column into the organization called Common Purpose, which is it masquerades, it kind of sells itself as a charity leadership training program. But what it's done is it's been the mechanism for providing transformational leadership programs to create change agents in almost every sector of society, institutions, business, education, everything. And the organization seems to have links with something in Chicago as well. That
Wow.
great epicenter hub of evil, educationally and psychologically speaking.
Yes.
But this is interesting because everything that's being done to the children in the schools, you can see how this then evolves into what's being done to the adults in terms of nudge culture. And we've got an example of it here, social distancing. And so a little link to an article there about the British Cabinet Office collaborating with French brainwashing guru to change the way we think. And that puts me in mind of the 2010 UK government document Mindspace and the Behavioural Insights team and things like that. And if we go to the next slide.
Oops. It's not working. There we go.
So this then gives you what are behavioural insights, how does that work, and then a particular application of them, behaviour change and energy use. A document done by the Department of Energy and Climate Change. And then look at here how this is what they're doing, isn't it? So it's to make the adults absolutely line up with the sustainable goals, and they will nudge you all the way there. So I just thought that I'd put those in.
Mm-hmm.
We see cell in the schools.
Nudge. I like that word
Yeah,
nudge. That's so
nudge,
very
and then
euphemistic.
and this is going to be part of lifelong learning. It already is. Adults are always being nudged. Moving on. Okay, here I've got four little pieces, crucial pieces that have become what I think of to myself as formula. Fantastic formula by which to understand what is happening, and they're from Dr. James Lindsay, from his various lectures, Gnosticism in the Modern West, American Maoism, etc. And they're on new discourses. And sometimes when I hear him say certain things, I digest everything I can from new discourses. But I'll just stop and I'll just write down what he said if it's something that makes me go, holy hell.
Right.
Yeah. Holy hell. And I'll stop and I'll have to listen to it several times and I'll just write it down. And these came about through that. I had to write them down. The inversion of praxis one at the top, which I've referenced before, and I've also given that an ABA, and an inversion of that, because when I was learning about the influence of Hegel and Glenn McGee's book and the role of the triangle, the Trinitarian aspect of the social, the spiritual, the material, I've been doing a lot of learning on that. And I normally don't get weird things happening when I'm sleeping, but I had a weird thing happen one morning. I normally wake up quite groggy and I'm very slow to get going. But one morning I woke up, I was bang awake. And as I was waking up, I heard this sentence: it's not a triangle, it's a trefoil. And this is weird, and I'm a geek for thinking this, but it's a 3D operation. It's not a 2D, it's a 3D in the way that we are transformed. I'm convinced of that. The conditioning, and how the conditioning builds upon itself in feedback loop. And that's why one prescriptive, off the shelf, off the peg way of trying to deprogram people doesn't work, because the feedback loop is dependent on how you have ingested this and how you have responded to it individually. But that's why that little graphic is there in the middle. So this one at the bottom, the Gnostic feminism one, about through Rousseau, Kant, and Hegel, you've got the three-piece construction that moves the spiritual realm into the social realm. That again links into this trefoil dynamic movement of processes. The social sciences now become the theology of the modern era. And we keep saying social justice is a religion. And the social justice activists and the teachers who are activists, the diversity officers, etc., they all behave to you as if they are religious clerics.
Right.
And you must obey, and there's penance to do if you don't.
Exactly.
Okay. I won't read them out at the top, but this one at the bottom in the corner, the handshake of faith and reason, I am deeply committed to that myself. As soon as I heard that, I knew that was the way. A lot of the time I'm down in the depths of what's going wrong and uncovering what's going wrong, but this is really the climb out. This is the way forward. But to do that, a lot needs to happen. And I'm thinking I must shut up now, because if I start to talk about this, I won't stop. But I'm very, very deeply committed to it, and I long to be able to talk to other people who are equally committed, who understand it and have ways to move forward with this. Okay, next one. And I'm very grateful for James's work.
Always.
Yeah. Just very quickly, people can read that about the human intellect as it's actually designed. It's a mirror of material reality. It must adhere to reality itself in the way a mirror should, to reflect reality. This is also what I'm getting very deeply into the introduction to the science of mental health. Now, what I see that the education system does, and of course our culture does it, but the education system does it by way of the series that it pushes through, is it operates not with our intellect as a mirror, a polished mirror, a clear mirror, but as a distorted funhouse mirror. And through this, our intellect is severely damaged and compromised, and then our emotional system is all skewed, and we don't understand reality, and we are trapped within ourselves and our own subjective mess. And I thought that this picture really captured it for me, in terms of how kids actually end up perceiving themselves, and the mental health damage, and their inability to understand the reality of the world. They're totally divorced from it in this pseudo-reality, this circus freakish existence.
Right.
Okay, moving on. Again, a little bit about actually how psychology is the study of human intellect at root. Again, I'm going to move over this now, otherwise people might lose the will. But that's where I am in my. It's just too complicated, I think.
Okay. So keep going.
Yeah, I'll keep going. If I had longer, I would do it, but I'm not going to try and do it now.
Okay.
Okay, so this, just to bring it back to the distinction between traditional psychology. I'm not dissing on all psychology. I'm just dissing on from when it became behaviorist predominantly. Okay.
Right.
So the traditional psychology understands that psychology itself is a subalternated science. What does that mean? It means that it exists in hierarchy as a form of epistemology. It exists in hierarchy with other things. It must assume its first principles from other sciences. So modern psychologists assumed the wrong principles. For that reason, the method of modern psychology was not proportionate to its object, because it did not understand the object of its inquiry. The object is intellect, okay, not stimulus response.
That's right.
It assumed an empiricist conception of man. It totally disregarded the immaterial intellect. And these presumptions led to its errors, and we are with the fallout of all of that. So the theoretical goal of behaviorist psychology is the prediction and control of behavior. It's not the attempt to understand. And the behaviorist recognizes no dividing line between man and brute. Of course,
Right.
they don't, because later psychologists began to move away from the traditional notion of man's composite of body and soul, and they moved to the view of man as purely material, being no different from an animal. But the whole system was set up to herd. So of course, that's the operating system they wanted to use. Okay, next one. And here we've got, I quote the work of Samuel Silver quite a lot, but he's actually chunked up his book that he wrote, and he's put it even in just little sentences and on Substack, and it's great because any one of these things will relate to all sorts of issues that are coming out in education, and that's why I post them in relation quite a lot. But let me just read a few of them, because I'm hoping that you'll go, yeah.
Sure.
So the left, that means Gnostics. He understands the Gnostic piece on this. Although presenting itself in different ways, its message has common axial elements. It speaks from a common philosophical lineage, and it shares the same substance. Its basic procedure is to substitute the ontologic for the ontic. And people might not understand those words, but I'm trying to put it in a very quick, understandable way. It basically says, if I use an analogy, okay, there's no such thing as a man, the essence of man. There are just body parts. There might be male genitals, or there might be, things phenomena that we can observe materially, but there's no actual immaterial essence of man that is the form and the function of man. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so it basically says there's no soul. There's only Mr. Potato Head, basically.
But then they'll turn
And
around
then
and say that there's a gendered soul that's floating around and gets trapped in the wrong body. So they say
but that's the
both.
divine. That's the divine spark. I know, and that's kind of do as I say, not as I do. That
Exactly.
my theories work for me. They don't need to work for you, etc. Its
Exactly.
discourse may be situated on the level of rhetoric, political, as its
Yes.
apparent linguistic sophistication has no ground. It negates being.
Mm-hmm.
So system belongs to the sphere of number 4. It's consistent with the political level of existence. And all of our education, because they took out the cognitive piece, and it's just affective learning, this is where we're held. This is where we're at. We're trapped on this political level of existence. And without the human sphere of number 5, our cognitive piece, intellection is limited to that of animals. Of course it is, because the behaviorists designed the bloody education system that we operate in.
Right.
So Gnostic agents imply and apply that level, number 4 level of intellection, onto others. So they will engage with you through stimulus response. They will say things not because they believe them to be true, but they know will get a reaction from you.
Right.
And thereby it enables them to have power over you. That's why when people are trying to respond to something that sounds crazy and respond to it in good faith argument, they're just stepping into the trap, into what a lot of people call the wizard circle, the trap. And they've got you, and they can manipulate you and push you around from there.
Exactly.
This one, the American mind, so that means the mind that's come through the Wundt Dewey education system. It's built on and conveys a Kantian worldview, Kantian idealism, the idea that we cannot know the essence, we can only know the phenomena. We cannot know a real man, we can only know Mr. Potato and everything that he may change to become. This means one is only allowed to have a perspective of reality. So that here we go. There's no actual truth. There's no objective reality. There are only perspectives. We're back in your conference tab. Sorry.
Right.
However, they can't see reality as it is. They're not even allowed to see reality as it is through coming up through the education system that we've all come up through.
Right.
Okay, so anyone who is wanting to operate in objective reality is considered suspicious, okay,
Yes.
or even anathema.
Or ill.
Yes, yes, or hate, full of hate. You're harming me.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
So the left doesn't use words to indicate something of reality. It doesn't recognize. It creates, or attempts to create reality. All right. And here at the bottom, and I would agree with this, the most difficult to overcome in terms of setting the education system right is moving from the quaternary stage, that stimulus response behaviorist model, which was its very inception, and moving into the quinary, which is the gaining back again of the human sphere of intellection that was there at the beginning of the one schoolroom culture. Am I right, Debs?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we can see models for that, but it's not the great behemoth, Leviathan public system funded by the state. Okay,
Right.
moving on. We're so nearly there.
I know.
Oh, we're there. We're there.
And we're
Hallelujah.
there.
Oh my God.
Oh
Everyone deserves
gosh.
a massive medal, drink, something
Yes.
nice to eat, something. Okay. I have ended with this because I absolutely love Theodore Dalrymple, aka Dr. Anthony Daniels, who was prison doctor but very prolific writer, kind of polymath. And when I first heard him speak, I think on YouTube, I then listened to everything else I could find him speaking at, including a number of the conferences for property and freedom conferences, and he was a frequent speaker at those.
Mm-hmm.
And I read every book of his I could get my hands on. And he absolutely, on this last blue statement here, this sentence, he is at the heart of what I believe and what I would remain committed to. So looks at the metaphysical objections to the assumptions of psychology and suggests that literature, okay, there is our perennialist curriculum, carrying the treasures and the wisdom of the past.
Yep.
The literature and the products of the literature is far more illuminating window into the human condition than psychology ever could be. That's me, totally agree with that. And always, I went into teaching because I wanted to be able to give to students the great teaching I'd received with these wonderful works, and to help the students to understand them, enjoy them, participate in them, I am the problem, Deb, of reproduction. I'm the Marxist problem of reproduction, I realize.
Yes. And
But,
so
but
am
it's
I.
interesting. Yeah. But when you hear that this intelligent critique of psychology industry is actually from a very experienced psychiatrist, like Bruce Scott was giving the critique,
Right.
you just realize and you see the sham that this psychology industry has always been. And
Yes.
that it was a political tool of subversion and a tool of control. That's all it ever was. And it bled out, and the parasite took root in the education system because the education system was the largest and most convenient delivery mechanism for this control system.
And I just happen to believe that children in particular are, I just don't think that psychotherapy works with children.
I agree.
I think you already have to be a mature adult. You have to be consciously choosing to go have productive, rational conversations with somebody who's trained to challenge you and push back on you and recognize disordered thinking, and who has as their goal getting you back to a place where you are thinking actively and rationally, as opposed
Mm-hmm.
to emoting and all of this. But anybody's going to sit with you and your feelings, and not push back or ask you what you think about things, is not going to
Mm.
help you. I just don't think
Mm-hmm.
it helps. It's my
No,
two
that's right.
cents.
That's right. We agree. We agree. Well, I want to say thank you hugely to your audience for sticking with us. And I'm well aware that what I've done is share my scrapbook. This is not a finished piece of anything. This is just where I'm at in terms of what I've gathered. I want to be able to develop this. I wanted to be able to develop it into the means to help other people. I
Right.
can't do that alone. I
No.
need support to do that.
So this is a call out as well as a show to people in the audience. If you or someone you know would be a good collaborator to help Christine put this into a form, a book perhaps,
I,
something.
I
What do you
did think
think?
about a book. I did think about a book, but then again, that people would read it or not, and they're most likely not because it's not exactly entertaining information. I
Yeah.
think a program. It would need to be a program that can be infused within perhaps prospective or existing or proposed
Right.
programs of study for teachers. Um, I don't know,
Even
something
some
that,
documentary, even some little documentary, a documentary movie or some documentary
yeah,
work.
maybe.
I mean, I love the idea of hooking you up with somebody who does infographics to take the tree and
Mm,
turn that into something, because that's a great starting point to educate parents, just to wake them up to the fact that the soil in which they've planted their children, their seed of their immortality, so to speak,
mm,
is not what they thought it was. It does not
yeah,
contain the nutrients they thought that it did, and therefore the plant that will grow out of it is going to be a fundamentally different organism than would have grown from a proper soil. So I love that, and I hope we can find somebody who is talented and enough to help render that. In the meantime, I want to make sure people know where to find you, that they can find you at the Palmer Worm on X or Twitter, whatever we're calling it these days, and also the palmerworm.substack.com
hmm
to read your articles. And, again, if somebody knows or has a great idea to take what we've just covered and put it into something that would be more widely appealing and easier to digest, I guess. Although I'm not a big fan of dumbing things down to the point where they're,
No, you can
yeah,
totally wreck the message that way. Yeah.
you really can't. There's a lot here, but it's important. And look how far back. How do you cover 100 years plus, really, of information without going into this level of depth? How do you show the repetitive nature, the
Yeah.
insidiousness of it? How do you show, as you said, the shedding of the skin and coming back as something? It's dressed up. It's the same thing dressed up as something else. It's
That's
the
right.
same
Well,
messages.
if there are certain aspects of this that people like, oh, that bit she covered there, I really want to know a lot more about that. You can contact me, direct message me, and then on Substack, I have enabled payment options. Totally, I've made everything free so far. Everything I've done has been free. But if you want me to do a deeper dive and present with greater refinement and clarity on particular areas, or commission me to do a research product of any kind, you can do that via paid methods on Substack.
Right.
Okay.
And I hope that people will avail themselves of that. This was fantastic. I am just so grateful. As I said to you the last time, it's fascinating to me. This is so fascinating, and I hope we can talk again soon about this to more of it, or if you come up with new information that we need to see, then please come back.
Okay, and thank you, Deb, because this is actually the first time that I have talked through this. My family are not, they don't want to hear this. Um, Bless them. And it's been very good for me to actually talk out loud about this. I've had this in my head.
Right.
I'm writing it, for such a long time, but I don't actually know anyone in my locale that is interested in this. And in order to work and refine on these ideas, you have to be speaking about them. You have to be in exchange, fruitful
That's right.
exchange with others. And it's so good to be in exchange with you, with your depth of knowledge that you bring to it. So I'm really grateful to you.
Mine, as you said before, mine is a little bit more boots on the ground, if you will.
Mm,
But all of this makes perfect sense to me. I am more a student of the American history component of it, so I understand the periods of history that this covers. But the details I did not know. I mean, I didn't know the names of some of the people. I obviously knew about Dewey, and I knew some of the things he said, but not all. and the other thinkers, the lineage I did not know. So this is
Mm.
really important, and I'm very grateful. You've educated me as well as the audience, so thank you.
Oh, well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for the
All right.
opportunity.
Thank you. All right. And thanks everyone for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment if you have things to share. And we'll see you next time. Bye bye.